Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We appreciate all of you being here for the third panel of this two-day hearing, ensuring agency compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. The President has, quote, committed to creating an unprecedented level of openness in government, end quote. Those were his words. But that is not the case when it comes to filling FOIA requests. The backlog of FOIA claims has more than doubled since the President has taken office. In March 2014, the Associated Press reported the Obama administration more often than any other administration had censored government files or outright denied access. Last year, the administration used exemptions to withhold information more than 550,000 times. Agencies must consult with the White House on, quote, all document requests that may involve documents with White House equities, end quote. Just in the last year, the government fully denied access or censored records in at least 250,000 cases, or roughly 39% of all requests. This is the highest number of denials in the history of FOIA. Yesterday, we heard from individuals who waited years to get public access to get public records they requested. These requests came from the media, national reputable media organizations, as well as individuals. The witnesses yesterday told us the FOIA system is broken and probably broken by design. In preparing for this hearing, the committee received numerous examples of delays, unreasonable redactions, and abusive fees, all of which hindered transparency. For instance, the EPA strategically avoided disclosure under FOIA when discussing the development of the Pebble Mine in Bristol Bay, Alaska. Documents obtained by the committee show that the EPA employees contemplated and advocated for a preemptive veto of the project well before the petition was submitted to the EPA. The IRS contacted one requester, Colin Hanna, on 4 separate occasions to explain it needed more time to respond to his FOIA request. But after 2 years, they closed his request, asserting Mr. Hanna failed to reasonably describe his requested documents. GSA identified 70,000 records as responsive to a FOIA request on its Green Buildings Initiative, and then used the number of records as a reason to close a request from the Taxpayer Protection Alliance. A requester waited 10 months before the DEA told them that his request for 13,000 documents related to the capture of Mexican drug lord El Chapo would cost $1.4 million. One 26-year-old freelance journalist wrote the committee about his first experience with FOIA, saying, quote, I often describe the handling of my FOIA request as the single most disillusioning experience of my life, end quote. The responses are enlightening and continue to come in. They seem to be numerous, bipartisan, across the board, consistent, and just absolutely frustrating. We also saw unreasonable and inappropriate redactions, including many from the FCC. Unredacted documents produced by the committee show the FCC blacked out the chairman's initials on every email he sent or received. Blacked them out. In doing so, the FCC claimed a personal privacy exemption that isn't permissible for use even with lower-level staff. The FCC also claimed that staff commentary like wow and interesting were deliberative and redacted them under B5 exemption. The time and expense that it takes to go through and do such silly, silly things is so frustrating and ridiculous. It gets very frustrating to hear anybody claim that, oh, well, we spend this exorbitant amount of money when you're going through and blacking out wow and interesting. And the name yesterday, one of my favorites, personal favorites, is blacking out the name of the Department of Defense person who sang the national anthem, as if that's some state secret. In one instance, simply quoting an attached press release qualified for a redaction, while the press release itself was released in full. It's amazing how many instances we have of publicly available information that is on the department's websites, comes back via a FOIA as redacted information. And a press release that it was publicly released is something that you have to hold back from the public? Makes no sense. How can we trust the government's redactions when we have examples of such unnecessary and, in many cases, inappropriate redactions? Despite significant corruption within the agency in recent years, the IRS is still obstructing taxpayers' efforts. Just getting the witness here today required a subpoena. The other 4 agencies we asked to invite their senior FOIA officers, they all agreed, they all showed up. Not the IRS. Nope, not the IRS. We can't have that. There's only one person at the IRS out of 90,000 that can testify, Mr. Koskinen. How wrong he is. Ms. Howard, we appreciate you being here, but I should not have to issue a subpoena to get your presence here. We're talking about openness, transparency. We want to hear from you. You've dealt with this for years. But yet we had to issue a subpoena in order to get it. And when we sent a letter to all 5 of the departments and agencies asking for some basic information, a 1-page request, anywhere between 2 and 8 different examples that we wanted information, Department of Justice, at least they sent us a letter. At least they gave us something. It was terribly incomplete. The IRS, no letter, nothing. We sent a request to you. I sent a subpoena to you. And you give us nothing? These other 4 did. I'm telling you, we will drag the IRS up here every single week if we have to. You are going to respond to the United States Congress. You are going to respond to the American people. You work for the American people. You're not going to just drag us around. Because you know what? If it was the other way around, if the IRS went after an individual, you wouldn't put up with it. There's no way you would put up with this. We expect you to respond to requests from the United States Congress. We have a right to see it. We have a constitutional duty to perform our oversight responsibilities. And for you to not respond to this committee in a timely fashion by giving us an electronic copy, which is what you were supposed to do, which the other 4 figured out, is not appropriate. We don't have that material, and we wanted it before the hearing. And I had to get a subpoena to drag you here, and it's wrong. I've heard personally from multiple FOIA requesters that they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And when they finally get a response, the request is either flatly denied or the pages are blacked out. We saw examples of that yesterday. So why is this necessary? And there's some cases where you do have to redact material. I understand that. I understand that. I appreciate that. But the lack of consistency is just stunning. The time that it takes is just unbelievable. Department of Justice is the FOIA litigator and the provider of agency-wide guidance ought to be the model agency, but we know that it is not. The Department of Justice denied approximately 40% of its FOIA requests in the fiscal year 2014. 3% of FOIA requests were denied on the basis of exemptions. 37% of requests were denied for other reasons. 5% of all requests were denied on the basis of claiming documents were, quote, not reasonably described. DHS is drowning in FOIA requests and needs to ensure the right resources are put towards properly clearing these backlog cases. The Department of Homeland Security receives about 1/3 of all FOIA requests and is responsible for about 2/3 of the federal backlog. So it was particularly disappointing to see the DHS FOIA program in the GAO's 2015 duplication report. Even the GAO has come in and said this is a terribly mismanaged, ill-executed system, so much so that there's highlights in the GAO's 2015 duplication report. My disappointment grew yesterday when Lizette Garcia from the FOIA Research Center revealed to us that DHS has hired contractors for the primary purposes of closing rather than completing cases. We'd like to explore that. Individuals requesting records from Homeland Security might hear from contractors multiple times inquiring about whether or not they're still interested in their requests. That always cracks me up, right? Citizen, person from the media goes out of their way to put in a FOIA request. So much time goes by that government comes back to them and says, are you still interested? That takes time and resources. And the State Department is as bad, if not worse, than DHS on FOIA compliance. The agency has open cases dating back for decades. Last year, the State Department failed to fully respond to more than 65% of its requests. The Center for Efficiency Government graded 15 of the top FOIA agencies and gave the State Department an F on FOIA processing. The agencies before the committee today need to bring sunshine to their FOIA programs. Agency leadership has failed to make FOIA a priority. And that makes the job of the witnesses before the committee much more difficult, if not impossible. We know you have a tremendous amount of requests coming your direction. There are a lot of good people who work in your departments and agencies, and we thank them for their services. Not everything is bad, but it is our role and responsibility to understand how it really works, what you're up against, what you're dealing with in a very candid way so that we can help make it better and that we can understand it. And there undoubtedly have to be changes. My guess is you want to see some changes. We want to see some changes. So we want to ferret that out. We've heard from the people that are very critical, but you're the people who are right there on the front lines, and you represent hundreds and literally thousands of people who are trying to do their job and deal with the tensions that come from a political persuasions that have been in both the Democrat and Republican side of the aisle. You have career professionals who have been there through lots of different organizations. We want to hear candidly from you what is working, what is not working, but give us candid information so we can help better understand it. That's all we ask today. We thank you again for your presence. And at this time, I'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for holding these very important hearings on the Freedom of Information Act, which is the cornerstone of our nation's open government laws. Thank you also to our agency witnesses for being with us today. You do have a critical responsibility, which is to make federal records available to the American public as effectively and efficiently as possible. You're also charged with implementing the directive President Obama issued on his first day in office to implement a new presumption of openness that reverses the policy of withholding information embraced by the Bush administration. Your job is also extremely difficult, and it's getting harder. You, and by implication the President, are being blamed for the increase in FOIA backlogs. But as we heard at our hearing yesterday, FOIA backlogs have increased in part as a result of cuts to agency budgets and the dwindling number of FOIA personnel forced to process record numbers of incoming requests. But we did not just only hear that. Mr. McGraw of the New York Times talked about a culture of unresponsiveness. And I hope that we will get to that and talk about that, because I agree with the chairman. In order for us to get to the bottom of this, we've got to have an honest assessment of what is going on. There were a number of witnesses that came before us yesterday that talked about a fear of people who are dealing with the FOIA requests, honoring them the way they should be because they're afraid to get in trouble. If that's the case, we need to hear about that. The number, going back to personnel, the number of FOIA requests skyrocketed from 2009 to 2014. In 2009, when President Obama took office, there were about 558,000 requests submitted to the federal agencies. By 2014, that number rose to more than 714,000, a surge of 28%. That's quite a surge. On the other hand, the total number of full-time agency FOIA personnel dropped to its lowest point since President Obama took office. In 2009, the number of full-time FOIA staff at federal agencies was 4,000. In 2014, that number dropped to 3,838, a decrease of about 4%. It seems obvious that Congress cannot continue to starve federal agencies for resources through budget cuts, staffing reductions, sequestration, and government shutdowns, and then blame those agencies for not being able to do their jobs effectively. But again, I want to go back. I want us not only deal with the personnel issues, but this whole culture that Mr. McGraw talked about of unresponsiveness, I want to deal with that too, because I want the total picture so that we can be effective and efficient in trying to remedy this situation. If we want FOIA to work, we need to restore adequate funding, staffing, and training so agencies can handle the increasing workloads they will continue to face. That's another issue. Is there an issue of training? It's one thing to have personnel. It's another thing to have personnel that are properly trained. Now, but this is not what House Republicans are doing right now, today, right now, down the hall, in the Appropriations Committee. Republicans are voting to withhold nearly $700 million. Hello, $700 million from the State Department's operational budget until it improves its document production processes. The operational budget includes the salaries for all of the State Department's FOIA employees. Let me say that again. Today, with a record number of FOIA requests and with record low FOIA staffing, the answer from the Republicans is to withhold 2/3 of $1 billion, more than all State Department FOIA staff salaries combined. How in the world is this supposed to help? It simply does not make sense. We know that there are problems with FOIA. We know there are delays. We know that we must do better. But it is hard to imagine a more counterproductive attack on the FOIA process. I also take issue with the claims that President Obama has not been one of the most aggressive and forward-thinking presidents in the history in pressing for more open government. I've often said that he never gets credit for anything. If things go wrong, they blame him. If things go right, he gets no credit. Those who try to argue that President Bush took the same kinds of unprecedented transparency actions as President Obama must have amnesia. There simply is no comparison, none. Beyond ordering the presumption of openness for FOIA, the Obama administration issued a national action plan to establish a consolidated FOIA portal and enhance training for FOIA professionals. President Obama did that. It established a FOIA advisory committee to improve implementation and increase proactive disclosures of government information. President Obama did that. The administration implemented a new policy of disclosing White House visitor records. President Obama did that. It established ethicsdata.gov, which posts lobbying, disclosure reports, travel reports, and Federal Elections Commission filings all in one place. And it has made enormous amounts of government information available through data.gov. That's right, President Obama did that. Finally, I expect that some of my colleagues will continue their focus on former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and her emails. So let's review the facts. On December 5th, 2014, Secretary Clinton provided more than 30,000 emails totaling about 55,000 pages to the State Department. The Department has those emails and is currently reviewing them to make them available to the public under FOIA. This is a sharp contrast to former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who admitted that he used a personal email account for official business all the time. Unlike Secretary Clinton, Secretary Powell did not preserve any of his official emails from his personal account, and he did not turn them over to the State Department. I'm not naive. I understand the Republican focus on Hillary Clinton as she runs for president. But if we really want to review compliance with FOIA, if we really want to review it and straighten it out and make it right and have the law, FOIA laws do what they're supposed to do, and if we really want to be most effective and efficient, we should not do so selectively by ignoring facts based on political expediency. As I've often said, we're better than that. To conclude, there's a major bipartisan step we can take to improve FOIA now. In February, I joined with Representative Issa. Yeah, that's what I said. I joined with former Chairman Issa, our former chairman, on a bipartisan basis to introduce the FOIA Oversight and Implementation Act. We passed it out of our committee unanimously, out of this committee, unanimously, several months ago, and I hope we can move forward in a bipartisan way to pass this bill now. The chairman said yesterday to me that we're going to see what we can do to work that out, and what we need from you is suggestions. I'm sure maybe all of you are familiar with 653, and if there are things that you think we can do to improve that bill to make it so that it can be more effective and efficient, and that you can do your jobs better, then we want to know it. Ladies and gentlemen, we can go around and around and around and around and around in circles. And we'll be talking about the same stuff 10 years from now, and the backlog will be even greater. And so I look forward to hearing what you all have to say. Again, give us the good, the bad, and the ugly so that we can now effectively address this issue. And Mr. Chairman, I really thank you for your indulgence. With that, I yield back.
I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our first panel of witnesses. Let me introduce them. Ms. Joyce Barr is the Chief FOIA Officer with the Department of State and has been involved in the FOIA process for the last 4 years. Ms. Barr was confirmed as the Assistant Secretary for Administration in December of 2011. As Assistant Secretary, she is responsible for the day-to-day administration of a variety of functions ranging from logistics, record management, privacy programs, the Working Capital Fund, and as well as presidential travel. We appreciate you being here. Ms. Melanie Ann Puste, did I say that properly? Is the Director of the Office of Information Policy at the Department of Justice since 2007, has worked with FOIA for at least the last 12 years. The Office of Information Policy, sometimes referred to as OIP, is responsible for the developing guidance for executive branch agencies on the Freedom of Information Act. OIP is charged with ensuring the President's FOIA memorandum and the Attorney General's FOIA guidance are fully implemented across the government. Before becoming Director, she served as 8 years as the Deputy Director for OIP, where she was responsible for the Department's responses to access requests made to the Department's senior leadership offices. Ms. Karen Newman serves as the Chief Privacy Officer and Chief FOIA Officer within the Department of Homeland Security. In her role as Chief Privacy Officer, Ms. Newman is responsible for evaluating department-wide programs, systems, technologies, and rulemaking for potential privacy impacts. She has extensive expertise in privacy law that helped inform privacy policy development both within the Department and in collaboration with the rest of federal government. She centralizes both FOIA and Privacy Act operations to provide policy and programmatic oversight and support implementation across the Department. Mr. Brody Fontenot serves as the Chief FOIA Officer and Assistant Secretary for Management in the Department of Treasury. He has served as the Chief FOIA Officer since January for the last, what year did you become that? Just this year. I wanted to make sure I had that right, January of this year. Mr. Fontenot serves as the Secretary of Treasury on the development and execution of Treasury's budget and strategic plans and the internal management of the Department and its bureaus. In January 2014, President Obama nominated him as the Treasury's Chief Financial Officer. Ms. Mary Howard is the Director of the IRS's Privacy, Governmental Liaison, and Disclosure Division in the United States Department of Treasury. She has served in this role since January of 2014. In this role, she is responsible for managing a multifaceted privacy program and ensuring compliance with the Privacy Act, the Freedom of Information Act, and the Internal Revenue Codes known as 6103. Ms. Howard represents the IRS interest in identity theft, information protection, disclosure, and data sharing. Ms. Howard began her career at the IRS in 1988 as a revenue agent and has served in various roles throughout the agency and throughout her career. We appreciate you all being here. If you would please rise and raise your right hands. Pursuant to committee rules, the witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. As you take your seat, we would ask that you would limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your full written statement will be made part of the record. And with that, we will now start with Ms. Barr, and you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. My name is Joyce Barr, and I serve as the Assistant Secretary for Administration, as well as Chief FOIA Officer for the State Department. I am a career Foreign Service officer with over 35 years of experience serving around the world. Thank you for your interest in and advocacy for improving transparency to the public. We share that goal at the department and work every day to achieve it. In addition to providing a range of support services around the world, the Bureau of Administration is also responsible for responding to requests under FOIA, as well as managing and maintaining official department records. The State Department is committed to openness. It is critical to ensuring the public trust and to promoting public collaboration with the U.S. government. However, meeting our commitment to openness is very challenging. We have a large backlog of over 16,000 FOIA requests. We know this backlog is unacceptable and are working to reduce it. Last year, we achieved a nearly 23% reduction in our appeals backlog by streamlining case processing. We made progress. More is needed. The backlog is due to several factors. Our caseload increased over 300% since 2008. In fiscal year 2008, the department received fewer than 6,000 new FOIA requests, but in fiscal year 2014, we received nearly 20,000. Since the beginning of this fiscal year, we have already received over 15,000 new requests. Second, many of these cases are increasingly complex. Other national security agencies are exempt from release of some information under the FOIA. As a result, requesters often come only to the department to request information on any and all national security issues. The department is often the public's first and only destination for documents on these issues. These complex requests require multiple searches throughout many of our 285 missions across the globe. They involve the review of classified or highly sensitive materials and require coordination with other federal agencies. They can generate large amounts of material that must be reviewed by state and interagency subject matter experts across the federal government. We receive many complaints about delays, but our goal is to do everything we can to complete each request as soon as possible. Secretary Kerry recently reinforced our commitment to transparency in his March 25th letter to our Inspector General. In that letter, he recognized the work that has already been done and noted the department is acting on a number of challenges to meet its preservation and transparency obligations. The Secretary asked the Inspector General to ensure we are doing everything we can to improve and to recommend concrete steps that we take to do so. I am here as the department's senior FOIA official to assure you that we have committed to working cooperatively with the IG with his review and any recommendations that may follow. My testimony for the record includes information about related issues such as our FOIA website and the role we play in helping the public get access to information from presidential libraries. Again, the Department of State is committed to public access to information. Mr. Chairman, I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today and would be pleased to address questions that you or any other member of the committee may have on FOIA within the State Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Ms. Bousteille, you're now recognized for 5 minutes. If you can make sure that microphone's kind of pulled straight and tight to your up there, you straighten it out and turn it on, that would be great. Thank you.
Are we good? Good morning. Good morning, Chairman and Ranking Member Cummings and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the FOIA and the Department of Justice's ongoing efforts to encourage agency compliance with the very important law. There are several areas of success that I'd like to highlight today. Despite receiving continued record-high numbers of FOIA requests and operating at the lowest staffing levels in the past 6 fiscal years, agencies have continued to find ways to improve their FOIA administration. 72 out of the 100 agencies subject to the FOIA ended the fiscal year with low backlogs of fewer than 100 requests. Processing nearly 650,000 requests, the government also continued to maintain a high release rate of over 91%. Agencies overall also continue to improve their processing times. For a number of years, OIP has encouraged agencies to focus on their simple track requests with the goal of processing those requests within an average of 20 working days. And I'm very pleased to report that this past fiscal year, the government's overall average was 20.5 days for those simple track requests. And there's also many other achievements that simply can't be captured by statistics. Agencies continue to post a wide variety of information online in open formats. They're making discretionary releases of otherwise exempt information. They're utilizing technology to help improve FOIA administration. The Department of Justice continued to work diligently throughout the year to both encourage and assist agencies in their compliance with the FOIA. I firmly believe that it's vital that FOIA professionals have a complete understanding of the law's legal requirements and the many policy considerations that contribute to successful FOIA administration. So as a result, one of the primary ways my office encourages compliance is through the offering of a range of government-wide training programs and the issuance of policy guidance on FOIA. In 2014 alone, my office provided training to thousands of individuals on a range of topics, including comprehensive guidance on the FOIA's proactive disclosure provisions. That guidance included strategies for identifying frequently requested records, and that it also encourages agencies to post records even before receipt of a single request, in accordance with the President's and Attorney General's FOIA directives. And I'm particularly pleased to highlight for you today the substantial progress that we've made on a number of initiatives to modernize the FOIA. First, in collaboration with the 18F team at GSA, we've been working on the creation of a consolidated FOIA portal that will be added to the resources that are available on FOIA.gov. This service will allow the public to make a request to any agency from a single website and will also include additional tools to improve the customer experience. Second, OIP has been working on the potential content of a core FOIA regulation. We've formed an interagency task force to tackle this project. We've met with civil society organizations to get their input, and our team is actually now hard at work drafting language for this important new initiative. We look forward to our engagement with both civil society and our agency colleagues as we work forward on that project. Now, third, in an effort to improve internal best practices, we launched what we're calling a series of best practices workshops, and we started there with the very important topic of improving timeliness and reducing backlogs. These workshops provide a unique opportunity for agencies to learn from one another and to apply innovative strategies more broadly across the government. And then finally, just this past March, I'm very pleased that we completed our commitment to enhance FOIA training by making standard e-learning training resources available to all federal employees. Embracing Attorney General Holder's message that FOIA is everyone's responsibility, these new training resources target the entire spectrum of federal employees, from the newly arrived intern to the senior executive. These training resources are available to all agency personnel anywhere in the world and at no cost. They address the FOIA's many procedural and substantive requirements, but they also emphasize the importance of good communication with requesters and good customer service, very important topics. Given how important all this is to the successful implementation of the FOIA, I'm very proud that OIP can provide these resources to all government officials across the world. So in closing, in the face of many challenges this past fiscal year, agencies have achieved successes in many areas. And while we certainly believe there's more work to be done, and we're continually looking for ways to improve the process, we're proud of what we've done so far, and we look forward to working with the committee as we jointly pursue the goal of improving access to information. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Newman, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. My name is Karen Newman, and I'm the Chief Privacy Officer and Chief FOIA Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm very pleased to be here before you today to discuss how DHS implements the Freedom of Information Act. DHS is composed of several distinct components, each with unique authorities and categories of records. Our components operate their own FOIA offices, staffed by FOIA professionals who respond directly to requesters seeking records. My office has dual responsibilities to protect privacy and promote transparency. Every FOIA request deserves careful consideration to promote transparency while protecting the privacy of individuals and operationally sensitive information. We have some significant challenges, and we also we've done some good things. As you know, DHS gets the largest number of FOIA requests of any federal agency and produces the largest number of responses. In fact, DHS received 40% of all FOIA requests submitted to the government in fiscal year 2014. In this 12-month period alone, we received an unprecedented 291,242 requests. As a result, we also have the largest backlog. Since January 2009, DHS experienced a 182% increase in its number of FOIA requests. At the same time, our FOIA professionals have significantly increased their output to meet this increased demand. In fiscal year 2014, these professionals processed 238,031 requests. The Department of Homeland Security takes our obligation to promote transparency and further the values of open government embodied in the statute very seriously. Nonetheless, we face serious challenges to connecting requesters with the records they seek. I'd like to briefly highlight some of the measures we've implemented to address these challenges, including to reduce our backlog. The Government Accountability Office was asked by Congress to review DHS's processing of FOIA requests. In November 2014, GAO published its report with 4 recommendations. We concurred with all 4 recommendations and are taking steps to address each one. For example, as recommended by GAO, we are in the process of finalizing our FOIA regulation, including preparing to publish a Federal Register notice seeking comment. As also recommended, we sought assistance from DOJ OIP in developing an implementation of a policy to ensure that all DHS components are capturing FOIA costs consistently. Quite apart from these recommendations, I've initiated several new measures that are designed to improve DHS FOIA operations in both the near term and the long term. First, in January this year, I requested a top-to-bottom independent review of 6 DHS component FOIA offices. That review is currently underway and is being conducted by the Office of Government Information Services, also known as OGIS. Second, my office is establishing a short-term blanket purchase agreement for FOIA support services. This contract will be utilized as needed by our component FOIA offices that require additional help. My goal here is really to empower the components to take quick action to manage backlog surges before they get out of control. Third, my FOIA leadership team has met with colleagues at other agencies to learn about the types of records that can be made available through technology and other routine procedures that are currently sought through a FOIA request. Fourth, my office continues to look for greater efficiencies from the use of technology. We offer each component FOIA office the ability to use a centralized FOIA tracking, processing, and reporting case management system with customizable features. We're also working with the DHS Chief Information Officer to develop an eFOIA mobile application that will enable the public to submit FOIA requests and check the status of these requests from a smartphone or mobile device. As a result of these measures, we are starting to see a slow but steady reduction in our backlog. Yesterday, I learned that as of May 2015, the DHS backlog was reduced by 10%, from 103,480 to 92,066 since the beginning of the fiscal year. Despite the challenges we face, I'm pleased the administrative and technological infrastructure we have put in place is resulting in a trend in the right direction. We are working hard every day to provide the access under the statute, and there is room for considerable improvement. I look forward to working with you to improve FOIA at DHS, and I welcome your recommendations and look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fontenot.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on Treasury's role in fostering transparency through FOIA. My name is Brody Fontenot, and I'm the Assistant Secretary for Management at the Department of Treasury and the designated department's Chief FOIA Officer. As such, I take compliance with FOIA seriously. Although the 9 Treasury bureaus independently process FOIA requests directed to each bureau, my team is responsible for providing agency-wide guidance and training, as well as monitoring Treasury FOIA performance and proposing agency-wide policy and improvements. When I joined Treasury 6 months ago, I was pleased to discover that Treasury team had already begun implementing new measures to improve FOIA performance and efficiency Treasury-wide. For example, at our departmental offices beginning in 2013, my team doubled the number of FOIA full-time employees dedicated to FOIA. We used additional capacity in 2 critical ways. First, we devoted focused attention on closing Treasury's oldest FOIA cases. Second, we made significant changes to procedures and staffing used to manage FOIA cases to improve efficiency and timeliness. We have more work to do, but these initial measures are already producing results. For example, in fiscal year 2014, the Treasury-wide FOIA backlog has decreased by 8%. We closed 13 of our oldest 20 cases agency-wide. We also processed more FOIA cases, FOIA requests in less time. Treasury closed 73% of incoming cases requests within 20 days. That's a 3% increase over 2013. 5 of 9 Treasury bureaus closed more requests than they received during the fiscal year. 4 Treasury bureaus ended the year with a 0 backlog. And we also released more information overall. Treasury released records in full or in part in response to 90% of cases in which responsive records were identified. In sum, today Treasury is releasing more information, processing more requests in less time, and making tangible progress on reducing its pending FOIA inventory and closing its oldest cases compared to just 18 months ago. But we also remain committed to making further strides. My team and I will continue to lean forward to drive improvements and to provide as much information as we can, as quickly as we can, both within the spirit and the letter of FOIA. I welcome your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Howard, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. I'm Mary Howard, and I'm the Director of IRS's Privacy, Governmental Liaison, and Disclosure Operations. I'm here today to testify on the IRS's policies and procedures in regarding and complying with requests for information under the Freedom of Information Act. Each year, the IRS processes thousands of FOIA requests, most of which require labor-intensive searches of both paper and electronic records. Despite this volume and complexity, the IRS closes more than 80% of its FOIA cases in 30 business days or less. In fact, our average cycle time generally hovers right around 21 days. The IRS follows a standard procedure for handling each FOIA request it receives. This involves analyzing the request to determine whether it can be processed under FOIA, determining the scope of the request, and searching for responsive records, reviewing material to decide what should be released or withheld, and sending a response to the requester. Excuse me. Over the last several years, our FOIA operation has faced a number of challenges. For example, the size of an average FOIA request and the volume of potentially responsive documents have mushroomed as more and more requests require searching email and other electronic documents. Broad requests can easily result in the IRS needing to collect and redact thousands of documents in response to a single requester. Another challenge involves personnel. We've managed to protect the overall staffing of the FOIA process in IRS, experiencing only a slight decline over the last few fiscal years despite financial constraints and related hiring freezes. but a high turnover rate has created some difficulties. Replacing our FOIA specialists involves not only hiring new workers, but also training them to bring them up to the expert level required to handle complex FOIA requests. The cuts to our budget have had a negative impact on the timing of replacement hiring and the delivery of the training. The net result has been a gradual loss of expertise in the FOIA area at IRS over the past several years. The problem is expected to get worse. We estimate that more than 60% of our FOIA professionals will be eligible to retire over the next 5 years. Another critical aspect of the IRS's ability to adequately respond to FOIA requests involves the management of official records. Here, too, the IRS faces significant challenges. This is largely because we don't have systems that let us easily search and retrieve electronic records and emails unless they're part of the taxpayer's case records. We are also unable to categorize, label, and centrally store electronic records, including email. And I hope you'll ask me some questions so I can give you some more insight into that. Without this capability, we must conduct an account-by-account search for documents to comply with a FOIA request. This is extremely tedious and time-consuming process, and that's before we get to the actual review for the exemptions. Additional funding would allow us to upgrade our infrastructure platforms and acquire more effective search capabilities. We could then respond to very large document requests far more quickly than we're able to now. So let me turn now to the events of 2013. Beginning that summer, the IRS was faced with an unprecedented number of FOIA requests related to the processing of applications for the 501c4 status. In all, there were 154 requests, and that might not sound like a lot, but they were very voluminous and complex in nature. At the same time, 4 congressional committees, the Treasury Inspector General, and the Department of Justice were all requesting large amounts of documents from IRS on the same issues. The IRS created a special team to review and produce documents responsive to the 6 official investigations. This team redacted the documents required by 6103 of the Internal Revenue Code to ensure that federal tax information was protected appropriately. Because of his experience on conducting reviews and producing documents for litigation, the IRS Office of Chief Counsel performed the 6103 reviews and the document production. That was required for all requested documents except those going to the tax writing committees. While counsel was conducting this effort, disclosure staff was addressing and responding to their regular FOIA casework that flows in at a rate of 10,000 to 12,000 cases per year. The IRS determined that responding to the investigations would take precedence over responding to the requests for information under FOIA, and the IRS has produced to Congress more than 1 million pages of documents for those investigations. Given that all FOIA documents need that 6103 review, we waited until we had fulfilled the request of the investigators until we went forward. Of the 154 cases I mentioned, FOIA cases, 34 remain pending with the Disclosure Office. We regret that the process has taken this long, but given the extraordinary circumstances, we really felt there was no other way that we could respond appropriately to Congress and the investigators. The IRS remains committed to FOIA as we work through these challenges. So this concludes my statement, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the hearings of the past couple days. And as I've contemplated what we've heard from the 3 panels thus far on FOIA in the last 2 days, I'm just absolutely convinced that FOIA really isn't the problem. It's just an outcome of the problem. The increasing size of government and the control of government is the problem. I mean, it's an absolute fact that we have amongst the highest paid bureaucrats administering these programs and others in government anywhere in the world. We have the highest technology, at least amongst the highest technology of any place in the world to administer our bureaucracy. We have the largest number of bureaucrats in the world to administer our bureaucracy. And with a size of government like this, why would we expect anything other than a huge, huge number of FOIA requests coming from an increasing number of American citizens who feel under attack from their own government? They're regulated, they're taxed, they're supervised, they're overseen, almost more than any other free country in the world. So I look at our panel of witnesses and I say, how in the world can you be expected to do your job in a way that satisfies not only Congress, but the people of the United States? They're going to ask more because they don't trust us. They're tired of being overrun. I'll get to my questions. Also, with all due respect, if dollars, more dollars, were the answer, then the war on poverty, the war on hunger, the war on pollution, the war on crime, the war on many other things would be ended. By the way, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, IRS Gate would be taken care of. We'd know the answers. Attorney General Holder, former Attorney General Holder, wouldn't have been held in contempt of Congress. Lois Lerner wouldn't have been held in contempt. FOIA isn't the main problem. Liberty demands transparency from a limited government to succeed, and we're not succeeding in addressing the concerns of our people. Government has grown, and thus it is increasingly mistrusted, and it will be mistrusted from all sides of the aisles, politically speaking. And so, Mr. Chairman, I again thank you for these hearings. It just makes it clearer and clearer why we are in the battle with the budget to reduce government to the size that liberty can expand, and not government. Ms. Newman, DHS has the largest backlog of any federal agency. How does the duplicative process of requests contribute to processing of requests contribute to backlog? And I refer specifically to the relationship between USCIS and ICE.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. Let me just say that with respect to the backlog, any significant delays in processing requests don't meet my standards, and I expect to see improvement. That goes for duplication as well. And as you may be aware, the GAO studied that aspect of our FOIA operations and made some recommendations that we are implementing in a number of ways. USCIS and ICE receive a significant number of our FOIA requests, many of which are immigration related. There may be instances where one or more of those components holds files or holds records that are contained in the alien file. We do not support unnecessary duplication, and we have
Will the two agencies be put back together in the arrangement that was in place before 2012 where they weren't duplicating?
Well, that's really not my decision to make. I also want to
Whose
tell you,
decision is it?
it's up to the members of Congress who write the statute. I will also tell you that we've implemented technology measures that—
But I don't understand that that's our responsibility. It worked before 2012. At least they worked in that non-duplicative arrangement. Why can't it be put back in that? Who is responsible? It's not Congress.
So my focus is really, as the Chief FOIA Officer, on connecting requesters with their records. And I have got to spend my time looking at the way the agency is constructed now, what inefficiencies, if any, are preventing us from meeting our transparency mission.
So the answer is you're not going to do anything to put the two component parts back together to stop duplication.
I am focusing on connecting records, connecting requesters with their records.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired and I didn't get the answer. Or I guess I did.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for your courtesy this morning and for holding this hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for your help in addressing this issue. Ms. Barr, there's been a lot of discussion up to now about Secretary Clinton and her use of personal email for official business. It's my understanding from the documents that we have here that Secretary Rice, Condoleezza Rice, did not use a personal email account for official, a personal email account for official business. Is that right?
Yes, that's what I understand. I understand that she used, she has told us that she did not conduct a lot of official business over email, but when she did, she used the State Department account.
Okay. How about Secretary of State Colin Powell? In his biography, in his autobiography, excuse me, he admits that he used his personal email account for official business all the time. I have a great quote here. He says, and this is a quote from former Secretary of State Colin Powell, quote, "To complement the official State Department computer in my office, I installed a laptop computer on a private line. My personal email account on the laptop allowed me direct access to anyone online. I started shooting emails to my principal assistants, to individual ambassadors, and increasingly to my foreign minister colleagues who, like me, were trying to bring their ministries into the 186,000 mile per second world, the speed of light." So, do we have any emails from Secretary Powell?
No, we do not have any emails from Secretary Powell. We did ask him if he had any official records. He noted when he came back to us that, he started at what was then the beginning of the State Department's email age, but he did not have any records to return to us.
And we have there were some critical decisions made, his speech before the UN about the existence of weapons of mass destruction. We don't have any emails regarding that decision and how those statements were made.
I have no personal knowledge about that, sir.
Yeah. Okay. This is troubling because it seems like in the case of Secretary Clinton, the way people handle their emails, at least it's been suggested, that really determine her fitness of whether or not she can be president. That's basically the statement that's being made today. And I'm puzzled because Secretary Rice did not perform in that matter. Secretary Colin Powell did not perform in that manner. And I'm just wondering if we have a uniform standard here. It doesn't seem from the Federal Records Act that it requires people to not use a personal email.
When we are dealing with the Federal Records Act, of course, we have to work with employees to maintain records. But with regard to using non-government email services, if people do that, we ask that they capture those records by copying their official account. We are working very hard, looking forward to make sure that people understand what their requirements are under the Federal Records Act. If, for example, they're out and their BlackBerry stops working, to make sure that they copy their accounts. But overall, I would say that what is most important to us is that we have that collection now,
Right.
and we are processing it.
I appreciate that. Let me just say I only have a little bit of time left here. It's my understanding that former Secretary Clinton delivered about 55,000 pages in emails.
That's correct.
Yeah. Have any of the other secretaries of state during your time, and you've been there a while, Secretary Rice, Secretary Colin Powell?
No, only from Secretary Clinton.
All right. That's about my time. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Howard, the White House on April 15, 2009 sent an a directive out. It says from Gregory Craig, counsel to the president, says, quote, "This is a reminder that executive agencies shall consult the White House counsel's office on all document requests that may involve documents with White House equities." He goes on and says, "This need to consult with the White House arises with respect to all types of document requests, including congressional committee requests, GAO requests, judicial subpoenas, and FOIA requests." So my question to you, Ms. Howard, what percentage, when Congress sends you a request for information, what percentage of that do you share with the White House?
To the extent that I've been involved in responses to Congress or responses to FOIA, we have never shared information with the White House. I became aware of this memo when we were asked for some information to actually demonstrate how many times we'd had this interaction. It was a FOIA request. I was curious as to why that we were getting a FOIA request since we don't have interaction with the White House on FOIAs.
So you've never sent anything to the White House?
I can't speak for the entire IRS. I mean, that would be a question for Chief Counsel or the Commissioner. I can simply speak for the Disclosure Office and the FOIA process. We do not interact with the White House.
So if you get a subpoena from the United States Congress, you get a subpoena from me and the Oversight Committee, you don't share that with the White House?
The fact that it exists, yeah, we may share the information that we got the subpoena, we may share the fact that we're working on a subpoena, but the actual documents that were being produced for the subpoena, we would produce those documents and redact them for 6103. Again, that might involve Chief Counsel.
What percentage of those do you share with the White House?
What percentage do I share with the White House would be 0.
Within the IRS, you do not share those, to the best of your knowledge.
To the best of my knowledge, the Disclosure Office does not consult the White House.
The White House told you you're supposed to do it. The White House directed you to do that. Are you telling us that you didn't comply with the White House request?
Well, you know, kind of towards the end of my career, so I'll be real honest with you. I saw this memo. I was amazed to see the memo. It's written to agency counsel, which is not me. I looked through the procedures that we have in our Internal Revenue Manual, which are basically how we run our operations for FOIA, and I never saw this. I never saw any evidence that this was incorporated, and I ignored it.
When you respond to a letter from Congress or there's a response to a subpoena from Congress, who sees that before we get it?
In most instances, counsel would look at something like that, the chief of staff of the commissioner, but again, that's really a question for the commissioner in terms of what that process looks like.
Lois Lerner, request for documents from Lois Lerner. Who saw those documents? Who did you have to get clearance from before we get those documents? Because we still don't have them all.
The 6103 redactions, as I said in my testimony, were done by Chief Counsel, the Office of Chief Counsel. We may have redacted some of those documents for, well, you don't get the FOIA
I'm asking what signatures do you need to see on there before you send it back to us?
I'm not certain because I'm not the one doing the sending. That would be.
But you're the director of this, and you've heard of Lois Lerner, I would hope by now.
I've heard of Lois Lerner, yeah.
Yes, so who do you have to check off with before we get those documents?
Again, sir, with all due respect, that was not a process that I was personally involved in, nor was my disclosure
You had to guess
operation.
that maybe we would ask about Lois Lerner.
If I had to, which is why the commissioner thought that perhaps he might be the best to answer your question.
But you're the director. It's your job and role and responsibility.
No, sir, my job is the FOIA program.
Your title, correct? Director, Privacy, Governmental Liaison, and Disclosure.
Right.
That's your title.
That is my title.
And you're telling me you're not responsible for the governmental liaison and disclosure part of that?
Not in the context that you're asking.
Why? Because it's Lois Lerner?
No, I think because it was an unprecedented, voluminous.
Wait, what was unprecedented about asking for information about Lois Lerner? What's unprecedented about that?
I think that Lois Lerner was the tip of the iceberg. I think that request included far
So do
more
we.
than just one person.
So what makes you think it's the tip of the iceberg?
In terms of the way the request was structured.
What was so striking about it? It's pretty simple. I mean, in this electronic age, we're asking for all of our emails in a certain time frame. How hard is that? I mean, that should take about 10 seconds, right? What's so hard about
wasn't.
producing those documents? Why does it
And
take so long?
again,
It's taken years.
I cannot talk to the specific documents about Lois Lerner, but what I
Okay,
can
so
give
when
you
the
is some
request-
insight into how we.
When the request came, both in a letter and then in a subpoena, who does that go to?
The commissioner.
It doesn't go to you?
No, not first.
What? But when we send these documents over, this doesn't land on your desk?
It does not land on my desk.
Does it land at any of your staff's desk?
No, it landed on the desk of the commissioner and the chief counsel.
So they are solely responsible for the fulfillment of the request and for the subpoenas, correct? I mean, if it doesn't go to you, you're the director of privacy, government liaison, and disclosure. And you're telling me that your department, your group doesn't get that because it came from Congress, right?
No, because we made a business decision that because of the scope of that request, we would set up a special project team. And that special
Who
project
decided
team-
that? I want some names here. Mr. Koskinen?
I think it was before his time, so I would guess the acting commissioner. It was
Right.
before my time too, so it's, whatever I tell you is just hearsay. But it was my understanding that the
Well, we expect a
commissioner,
little bit more than, I mean,
again, it was not directed towards my.
so it doesn't come through your office, your department, your group, whatever you want to call
We
it.
might be involved in it, but so are the IT people.
Was the Lois Lerner case dealt with differently than anything else? You said it was unprecedented. I want to know why.
Well, I think because there was a lot of other 504c3, there was a C4 documents that were requested at the same time.
So anything that we had to deal with those documents, the C4 documents, went a different direction than normally.
It went into a sort of a project team where we felt that we
So there's a
could
special
handle
project
those.
team that's set up.
There
to-
was at the time. I don't believe it's still functioning
Why was there a special team set up?
because of the volume of the.
It didn't have anything to do with volume. It had to do with the topic, didn't it?
I don't believe so, no. I think it was a business reason of how we would best use our resources. In actuality, looking back on it, from my perspective, it was a very positive thing for the disclosure office because we could do all of our regular FOIA work except for those particular topics.
So, I mean, what you're telling me
All
is
this was done.
anything that came in on this topic, C4, not just Lois Lerner, but C4, went in a different route. It went to the commissioner and it went to the general counsel. There's only two political appointees in all of the IRS, the commissioner and the general counsel. Those are the only two out of 90,000. And you're telling me that those requests went a different route than normally anything else does, and it went to them, correct? That's exactly what you told me.
I don't want to go on record as saying that I know specifically where requests went to. My understanding is that requests from Congress are given a certain level of respect and concern so that they go to the commissioner's office first and are parceled out as to who's going to work them after that.
Do you know who the lead of that special team, that special project team was?
I do not.
All right, my time's expired. We'll now recognize Mr. Cummings?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Cummings for
Thank you very much. Ms. Newman, you said that there was room for improvement. Can you tell us what those improvements might be that you were talking about? Because we got to, I mean, I want to get to the bottom line and be effective and efficient. So tell me.
As do I, Congressman Cummings. One of the things I did when I first came aboard was to try to understand where some of the bottlenecks were in the department in terms of the component backlogs, and understand what the reasons for those backlogs might be. In doing so, I did identify some of the systemic challenges and decided that we really did need, to address in the long term, an independent, comprehensive review of what these systemic challenges are, what the reasons for these backlogs are, and then get some best practices in place for dealing with those. In the interim, I decided that I could implement some more immediate measures to address some of these challenges. For example,
I want to know what still needs to be done to improve. I don't have a lot of time.
Sure. I personally believe that we can leverage technology and deploy much more advanced technology throughout the department that can be used to address.
And what's it going to take to make that happen?
Well, we're in the process of doing that already. We are in the process. We've rolled out a successful pilot that's intended to reduce the backlog and duplication. It's been adopted by 11 components thus far, and other components are in line to adopt it as well.
How many components are there?
We have, well, there are 15 components that process FOIA requests. 11 of these components have adopted this technology
So you need 4 more,
solution.
is that right?
Yes, sir.
4 to go. When do you expect that to happen?
I personally don't, I'm not aware of the time frame. I would be happy to confer with my staff and get back to
Confer,
you
I
on
would
that.
appreciate it if you could confer
Absolutely.
and get back to me and let me know when that's going to happen.
I'd be happy to.
I'd also like for you to, because I don't have a lot of time, I'm going to ask that you all give us your recommendations. You know, as I listen here, it seems like everything, you all make everything sound so rosy. And I want to try to get to the bottom line of what the problems are. We heard a lot of testimony yesterday. In all fairness to you, I think all of you all are probably doing a whole lot of good things. But at the same time, we have to balance that against what we have heard over the last day or so. Ms. Barr, I want to ask you, will you do that for me, Ms. Newman, and
Yes,
other
I will.
witnesses?
Yes, I will.
Ms. Barr, I want to ask you some key questions, because I want to follow up on what Mr. Lynch was talking about. I want to thank you for being here. For the past several months, there have been intense discussion about former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and her use of personal email for official business. However, new documents which we received late last night raised significant questions about the email usage of former Secretaries of State Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell. The State Department sent a letter to these former Secretaries of State last fall requesting information about their use of personal email for official business. On December 5th, 2014, Secretary Clinton and her attorneys responded by providing more than 30,000 emails totaling 55,000 pages. The State Department now has those emails and is currently reviewing them to make them available to the public under FOIA. Is that correct, everything I just said?
Yes, sir.
All right. Neither Secretary Rice nor Secretary Powell provided any emails to the department in response to that request. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Not one. We know that Secretary Powell used a personal email account for work because he wrote about this in his biography, and Mr. Lynch talked about that. But unlike Secretary Clinton, Secretary Powell did not preserve any of these emails. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your knowledge.
Yes, he told us he did not have access to those anymore.
So that means you didn't have access to them.
No.
Last night, the committee received new documents regarding former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. In 2007, the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington submitted a FOIA request seeking State Department policies governing the use of Secretary Rice's email accounts. CREW also requested copies of emails from her official account, as well as, quote, email messages that have been sent by the Secretary of State from any private mail account that pertain to official government business, end of quote. We received the State Department's response to this inquiry last night. It states that although the department officials are still looking, and I quote, no responsive material was found, end of quote. So, Ms. Barr, are you aware of any emails that have been identified from Secretary Rice's email account? Any?
No, I'm not aware. Well, I want to make sure that I understand your question. Are you asking me if I'm aware of any emails from her account that should be regarded as responsive material to this request?
That's right.
Okay, no, I'm not aware of any that are responsive to this particular request.
All right. And we already know you don't have emails from Secretary Powell, is that right?
Yes, that is.
So between the two of them, you don't have, do you have emails?
I have, you mean my personal?
No, 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 no. No, in response to your request, you sent the request, you all sent the request. Do you have any emails with regard to the request?
No.
So, Ms. Barr, as you sit here today, can you tell us with certainty whether Secretary Rice even had an official State Department email account?
Yes, it is my understanding that she had an official State Department request.
Account.
Okay. Sorry. But I would like to also say that emails are not the only way we capture records. We have cables, memos, agendas. We have lots of other ways that we capture official records. So while in these two instances, we did not have emails to respond to requests, we have other types of records that we maintain that are looked at to see if we have responsive materials when people ask us through the FOIA process.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, right now, though, I'm just talking about emails.
Okay.
You don't have any emails from Secretary Powell?
That are responsive to the request?
Yes, ma'am. And you have none from Secretary Clinton. I'm sorry, Secretary Rice.
That is true. That is correct.
It's amazing. Secretary Powell and Secretary Rice served during critical times in this nation's history. During 9/11 attacks, the war in Afghanistan, and the war in Iraq. Yet, as far as we can tell, State Department officials don't have their emails from this 8-year critical period. Ms. Barr, Secretary Powell has been straightforward about his failure to preserve his emails, but Secretary Rice has never spoken publicly about hers. In response to the State Department's letter last fall, her representative responded by proclaiming, and I quote, "Secretary Rice did not use a personal email account for official business," end of quote. Do you know if Secretary Rice's attorney conducted a thorough review of her personal email account like Secretary Clinton's did? Do you know?
I am not personally familiar with what her attorney did to respond to that request, sir.
Well, my time has run out, but these new revelations are startling, so I hope that we will look at that era just like we've been looking at the present era with regard to these emails. All right.
Thank the gentleman. We recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Puste, let me come to you. Did you watch the testimony yesterday where we had 12 different witnesses across 2 panels talking about FOIA requests?
I didn't watch it, but I was keeping up with it throughout the afternoon.
So you're aware of their less than flattering testimony as it relates to your particular involvement with FOIA requests? Maybe not yours personally, but the Justice Department. Are you aware of that?
Well, I don't know.
That it was less than flattering?
I don't know if I'd agree with that. I respectfully don't agree with that characterization. I understand, though, let me say this. I understand that, that requesters have examples of things that are frustrating experiences.
So what you're saying is that the testimony that we heard yesterday was just a few examples of frustrating, because that's not what I got from that. And I would characterize it as less than flattering. So let me go. I'm having a hard time reconciling your opening testimony with the testimony of a number of witnesses yesterday with regards to the Department of Justice and your responsiveness, because your opening testimony provided very glowing terms. So I guess my question for you is, on scoring different agencies on how they respond, who gets the best marks and who gets the worst marks on your scoring? Because I understand you score.
Right, we do an assessment every year. Let me
just who gets the best ones? I don't need to. I've got 5 minutes. So who gets the best scores and who gets the worst scores?
Well, we have. If you look at the assessment, you'll see we have a range of milestones, over 20-some milestones. So we rank and score agencies on a whole bunch of things.
So how does the Justice Department score on those milestones?
Justice Department scores quite well on those milestones.
Okay. Would you suggest that if you're setting the milestones and you're scoring the milestones, that the testimony from all these other folks who, if they set milestones, they wouldn't give you high marks. How do you give yourself high marks?
I actually, for the past 2 years, Congressman, have been working collaboratively with representatives from civil society to set the milestones. It's actually been a joint effort.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Ms. Atkinson gave us an example of requesting a FOIA request and it taking 10 years. Her daughter was 8. She was 18 by the time the FOIA request. Would you say that that is a great response?
Right, no, of course not, of course
Okay,
not.
would you say that that response is unique, that there are none others like that throughout all the FOIA requests?
No, of course not as well.
So what part of violating the FOIA law that is very clear, I mean, you know the FOIA law, I would assume, and it gives particular responses. What part of violating the FOIA law does the Department of Justice condone?
Right. I think that it's important, it's important to look at areas that need improvement in FOIA.
Okay, so what part of the law does
improving
the Justice Department condone?
We don't we endorse.
So you don't condone violating the law?
Of course not.
Okay.
Of course.
So I would think that would be your answer. Do you violate the law?
Of course not.
So you've never violated the FOIA law?
We work hard, we work very hard at my office.
I believe that.
To promote,
so the question is,
transparency and promote compliance with the law.
I believe that. So the question under sworn testimony today is the Justice Department does not violate, has never violated the FOIA law. Is that your testimony?
So if I think what you're asking me is, do we ever respond to requests beyond 20 working days?
Is that the law?
And the law allows for extensions of time.
Okay, so with
In
the
unusual
extensions,
circumstances.
have you ever gone beyond the law?
So I wouldn't characterize it as going beyond the law, because the law actually recognizes in many different aspects, the FOIA recognizes the reality, Congressman, of the need for agencies to take more time to respond to certain requests.
All right,
that are
is there
preliminary, for example,
anything in the
for
law?
example.
So let me ask it a different way. Is there anything in the law that would ever give you waivers to allow 10 years to respond to a FOIA request? Because I can't find it. Can you direct me to where it would be 10 years?
Sure. The way the timing provision is set out in the FOIA is, it's in Section 6. There's a basic response time of 20 working days. There's a provision to ask for 10 additional days.
Right.
And then there's a whole series of steps that agencies can take if they need beyond the additional 10 days. There's a whole series of things that agencies
So
need to
can you
do.
direct me to
I
the
can-
actual paragraph and send that to
absolutely.
me where it says it's okay for 10 years?
Absolutely. I'll send you the paragraph that says that if
So do you
need
believe
to
it's
go-
in there for 10 years?
What I know is in there is a provision that allows for an extension beyond 30 working days.
I yield back, thank you.
Thank you. And we would be interested if you send that to the committee and help articulate that for us. That would be
Of
most
course.
helpful. Thank you. Now I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barr, I must say I am reeling from the stunning revelation that you have no emails from 2 former secretaries of state who covered the entirety of the Bush administration. And I want to make sure I understood your answers to Mr. Cummings very clearly. You are the top FOIA official at the Department of State, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And if I understand your sworn testimony, you're saying that as of right now, the State Department has not been able to identify any emails from Secretary Powell or Secretary Rice. Is that correct?
What I was saying is that the State Department did not have any emails that were responsive to the request.
Do you have other emails?
I know that we have other emails for Secretary Rice. I'm not sure what we have in our collection for Secretary Powell. My statements were based on what I understood to be a summary of how we had requested a number of former secretaries
Well, now,
to come back
Ms.
to
Barr,
us
Ms.
with
Barr, my
whether
time
they
is
had
limited. My
official
time is
records.
limited.
Okay.
I'm going to help you clarify your testimony. So are you saying you actually do have emails from Secretary Powell? They just weren't.
I'm not sure if I have actual emails from Secretary Powell in general. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking is there any evidence at all of any emails from Secretary Powell on his official or personal email accounts that you have access to as the head FOIA official for the Department of State?
I know that he did not provide any copies of emails of official records.
Really? For 4 long years?
After, please let me finish, okay?
Yes, but
Because-
please do so
because I
in
think
a
I
concise
want-
fashion. I only have 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Go
We
ahead.
don't have any emails that were responsive to our request.
No, you keep on using that phrase. Do you have
Because-
any emails from Colin Powell that you have
Because
access
my
to?
personal knowledge of what we might have in general, I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Do you
But
have
I
access?
thought that the question that was asked to me before was much more specific, so.
Do you have access to any, since you're not sure about Colin Powell, which I still find stunning, there's no evidence of any, but you're not sure. What about Secretary Condoleezza
I
Rice? Do
know
you have-
that she used a state.gov account.
So you have
and
access-
I'm sure we have access to them, but I thought that the question was in the context of responsive material or.
What do you mean by
with
responsive material?
Because we had a request.
Yeah, and,
That's what I thought it
your testimony was there is no evidence of extant emails from her responsive to the request?
Yes,
None.
we didn't provide any.
So what happened to them?
Well, if it's not responsive, we don't supply it, but that doesn't mean that that there are no emails, period, from her.
But there are some emails from her. You're not sure about Colin Powell, but you are sure about Secretary Rice?
I know that Secretary Rice used the state.gov account
Which means they're preserved somewhere.
somewhere.
Have you ever seen one?
No, not personally.
I find that amazing as well. Do the Federal Records Act apply to both Secretaries Powell and Secretary Rice?
Yes,
And were
applies to all, but again, federal records can be more than email.
I understand that, but let's stick with emails for a minute.
Okay.
So is it compliant with the Federal Records Act to, in fact, wipe out emails, whether they're on your
No.
personal account or your official account?
It is not, people are, we ask each employee to preserve official records, and that's a responsibility for every employee.
Right.
And we have to depend on individual employees to carry out their responsibilities.
So just to summarize, if I get, and please correct me if I get it wrong, your testimony is you're unaware of any surviving emails from Secretary Powell
You
responsive.
said personally.
I understand. You're that,
know,
but you have a title. Presumably, you'd know if anyone knew.
Oh.
But we'll use your phrase, responsive to the request.
Yes.
In that lane, there are no surviving emails from Secretary Colin Powell that you're aware of.
That are responsive to that.
And with respect to Secretary Rice, similarly, you're unaware of any surviving emails from Secretary Rice responsive to the request.
That is correct.
There may be, or in fact, your guess is there are surviving emails from her, but they are outside that lane of responsive to the request.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, as you well know, each of you, this committee heard testimony from several esteemed members of the press and outside groups who have experienced tremendous problems with FOIA requests, and quite frankly, I was shocked and astonished by the testimony we heard yesterday. Several comments stick to my mind, one in particular by Tom Fitton, the president of Judicial Watch, who used the phrase criminal obstruction to describe the manner in which the IRS has handled FOIA requests having to do with the IRS's targeting of conservative groups. He also said that an agency official actually told him that if you scrutinize the government will scrutinize you. Moments ago, Ranking Member Cummings said that all of you are making things sound rosy. We're not talking about a rosy situation here. We have a mess with potential criminal obstruction taking place. Ms. Howard, is that what Tom Fitton described, common practice with the IRS?
It's not my experience that it's any practice within the IRS. I've seen no evidence of criminal wrongdoing or of any intent to do anything but
So you
make
see
records
nothing, no
available.
targeting take place. So you would deny what has come out pretty nationally.
Outside of my area of expertise, I can only speak to the records production.
If someone makes a FOIA request to the IRS, is that person potentially now a target for retaliation?
No, sir.
Okay. So you would deny that there's been any type of retaliation, audits, that type of thing from the IRS because of people are so-called scrutinizing?
I'm simply saying that in my experience, the way in which FOIA requests come in, they're logged into a system. The folks who work the FOIA requests have access to that system. The rest of the IRS has no need to have access to that system. So I'm not sure that
That's
it's
not my
common
question. My
knowledge.
question is, has the IRS participated in retaliation through audits or whatever because people are requesting FOIA information or what may be perceived as scrutinizing the IRS?
I have no direct knowledge of the audit side of the house. That's not my area of expertise or familiarity.
But you do have knowledge of the FOIA side of things.
I have knowledge of the FOIA side
And
of
you're
things.
denying that there would be any such retaliation.
I have not shared any information with anyone who would be in a position to retaliate.
Okay. Let me go further to a comment you said, made a little bit earlier in discussion with the chairman regarding Lois Lerner. Are you saying, and I just want to clarify your testimony here today, are you saying that there was no special treatment that was given to her for protection in spite of the fact that you yourself said that her case was the tip of the iceberg?
What I meant was that the request for her emails was just part of the request that this committee and other investigators made for information on the C4 issue. One of the things I do want to clarify that I think—
Please be quick.
Okay. Is that the title governmental liaison in my title really is not the liaison with Congress. It's liaison with state and other federal agencies and the data exchanges that we do with them. That's where my area of responsibility is, in addition to FOIA. So a lot of the requests that would come from Congress would not automatically land on—
We're not talking about requests from Congress. We're talking about FOIA requests and other requests. We're trying to get to the bottom of what appears to be outright obstruction, and we're getting a rosy picture that, quite frankly, is not an accurate picture. I'm going to shift over, Ms. Newman, to you. In your testimony, you mentioned that your agency avoids FOIA requests that might be operationally sensitive material. Is that a correct?
No, it's not. We don't avoid any FOIA requests, but we do consider FOIA requests that may be seeking information that is operationally sensitive and may be protected.
Is operationally sensitive, does that include anything that your agency would not want the public to know or see?
No, it would include information about law enforcement investigatory techniques, for example, national security issues, and when we get a request.
So there would be no other case where information is denied. Listen, we had testimony one after another, and I don't know where you guys get some of your information, quite frankly. We had people all over the board saying the average wait is years to get FOIA responses. I wish I had more time. My time is running out, but the FOIA request is absolutely essential to government transparency and the constitutional rule of law, and the evidence is abundant that it is at least being avoided, if not totally obstructed, and this is an issue we have got to get to the bottom of, get to the root of, and you folks here are part of the problem. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Barr, in September of 2012, the OIG for the State Department issued a report on the department's FOIA program. I'm looking at it now. It's inspection of the Bureau of Administration, Global Information Services, Office of Information Programs and Services. And the report states, and I quote, the department's FOIA process is inefficient and ineffective. Are you familiar with this report?
Yes, I am.
I know you'd only been on the job just a few months before when it was issued, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more about it. The report focused on the Office of Information Programs and Services. That office is within the Bureau of Administration, I understand, and you serve as the Assistant Secretary for that bureau. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I'd like to go through some of the issues raised in the report. It said about the Office of Information Programs and Services, and I just want to quote the report. It says, persistent neglect of fundamental leadership responsibilities and management practices has had profound consequences in IPS. The OIG's team's observations, discussions with IPS staff, and the responses to OIG's questionnaires indicated an office with problematic morale, perceptions of favoritism, micromanagement practices, and confused lines of authority. This really concerns me, and I understand that you'd only been on the job just 6 months, so this investigation probably took place before you got there. But how did you respond to those findings?
Well, I took that OIG report very, very seriously. It was within the first 6 months of my tenure, and I immediately became involved in doing everything I could to address the issues. In addition to just devoting my personal time to doing whatever I could to make sure that employees received proper leadership training, that there were more clear lines of authority. We actually moved some people around. One part of the problem was that there were supervisors who were not physically located close to the employees that they were supervising. In addition to that, at that time, I did have some positions that I was able to reallocate to that section. We also had a number of vacancies, and in fact, at the beginning of that period when the report was being released, we were able to hire a new director who made a huge difference in that section. It is something that I am always involved with any of my units, but this report was like the first very negative report I'd received on one of my units when I started, so I took it very seriously.
Would you say that this is an ongoing process for you? Are you still dealing with the issues in the report?
Yes, we've closed most of the recommendations, but some of the recommendations that involved other bureaus, we are still working on it. But this is something, we have to do a quarterly report to the IG, so it's something that I talk to the senior management in that section about all the time.
The report also found flaws in the department's records management, and it stated that the department's records management infrastructure is inefficient and ineffective. It also said that failure to develop and implement electronic systems has resulted in poor performance. Is the State Department overall taking steps to improve its records management processes?
Yes, we are. First of all, we are participating in a government-wide working group that is dealing with records management. And I have been in a couple of those meetings myself, and I can assure you that there are very passionate and involved people working very hard on this. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier in my oral testimony, the Secretary himself is very much committed to preservation and transparency and has asked the OIG to look into a number of issues, and what we are doing on records management is one of those issues.
Thank you. Well, I hope that the State Department will continue to make these priorities a top goal for the agency. FOIA is certainly a critical tool for Americans to demand the accountability that they deserve from their government. I'm sure you know that this committee and myself personally will be following up to make sure that that process continues. Thank you.
Okay,
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady, and we'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the panel, in preparation for this hearing, I actually used my search engine on my computer to look up FOIA requests. And I was quite surprised and somewhat disappointed, I have to be honest with you, that one of the results is what I hold in my hand. And this is a handout from the website of the minority leader, the minority party leader in the Senate, Senator Harry Reid. It is a document that encourages deferred action applicants to file FOIA requests. To file FOIA requests for criminal records and immigration files so that the lawful permanent residents who are here now can actually find out and be prepared when their parents or their children file for deferred status. I was really shocked, and it's quite impressive. It offers tips as to what they should do to file the FOIA request, but it clearly states in this handout, it clearly states that the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services is not currently accepting any applications because of the court order that we're all familiar with. Yet it still encourages them in this document to go ahead and file. It still encourages them to do that. Ms. Newman, I want to ask you, in the last fiscal year, the FOIA backlog at DHS has more than doubled. Why is this? Do you know why it's more than doubled?
Congressman, the FOIA backlog has more than doubled in part because we've received an enormous increase in the number of requests for fiscal year 2014. ICE and USCIS are the recipients of most of these requests, as many of these requests seek immigration-related records. I can't.
So you do think that it's a result of people encouraging these applicants to file FOIA requests?
No, sir, I don't. I can't speak to the many events that take place outside of DHS, but I do focus, that trigger surges in requests. We do focus on trying to fulfill those requests.
But you do admit that those requests have been related to immigration requests?
I am saying, if I understand your question correctly, that a significant number of the requests received by the department are requests for immigration records.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. In your opening statement, you said that the number of requests through DHS has increased over 182% since President Obama took office. That's correct. Is that correct?
Since he issued his open government directive.
So do you think, since he issued his open government directive?
2009, yes.
So you think it is a result of the Deferred Action Program?
Again, I can't speak to the many events and activities outside of the department that may trigger a surge in FOIA requests. I can't speak to whether or not anyone is encouraging requests and whether those words of encouragement might
Ms. Newman, are you familiar with the G639 form?
I can't say that I am off the top of my head.
Okay, when did you take over in this department?
At the end of fiscal year 2013.
Okay, the G639 form, I believe, was just introduced in your department this year. So I would think that you would be familiar with it.
And if you might remind me what that is.
Well, it has to do with the applicants that it was created for the FOIA requests from those who were seeking information on DACA and DAPA to help expedite that. Do you know whether that form has been used, the increase in the usage of that form?
I personally don't have awareness of the specific form that you're talking about. I would be happy to consult with my staff and get back to you.
Well, I hope you will. I would think that you would have complete awareness of that, being the director, if there was a new form implemented in order to expedite some of the FOIA requests that are coming through.
Yeah, I'm not aware of specifics with respect to the processing of specific cases or specific types of cases.
Okay, well, can you get back with us on that and please provide for this, not only that, but what it's used for specifically?
Absolutely. Because
that's what I understand it's used for, and if that form has been used and how much it's increased.
I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I want to mention to you again, or mention to you as well, Ms. Newman, I have a bill, H.R. 1615, that I'm introducing to address to address the backlog of FOIA requests at DHS. As you know, the majority of FOIA request backlogs exist at DHS, majority throughout the government. So this is something, I hope that you will look at it. I hope it'll be something that can assist you and help us to eliminate this backlog as best we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, witnesses. Good morning to you all, and thank you for the information that you're providing to us. One of the things that I really wanted us to focus on is my colleagues here discussed that there is a problem, and everyone is aware that there's a problem. I don't think that you sitting here are the problems. I think that there are processes and directives and issues that have happened within your agencies that create these backlogs that we're talking about. And I'd really like to try and get to the root of what is the reason for this. We've talked about in some instances, Ms. Pouste is the director of the Office of Information Policy, that agencies are receiving more and more FOIA requests, correct? And you highlighted in your testimony that the federal government received 714,231 new FOIA requests in fiscal year 2014. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In the beginning of fiscal year 2009, I understand that there were 557,000.
Right.
That's an increase of 28%.
Exactly.
So that's one variable that becomes a problem for us, which is the increase in the number of FOIA requests. Ambassador Barr, you spoke as well, and I understand that the Department of State has an increase in over 300% of FOIA requests. Is that correct?
Yes, since 2008.
So that's one side of the equation. I think what we haven't really talked about is the other side, which is the amount of resources that you have. And I would have hoped that you all would have brought that to light in some of your testimonies. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit as well. So in 2009, the Open Government Directive instructed agencies with sizable FOIA backlogs to try and reduce those by 10%. Was that correct? Was that a directive that was given to each one of you?
Yes?
Yes?
Correct. That's issued.
Was everyone issued that? And Ms. Pouste, you mentioned that the government shut down in your testimony, and you said, quote, "We roughly estimate that this 3-week period could have resulted in 32,000 more FOIA requests being processed," right?
That's correct.
What are the resources? Have you increased the resources that you have to address these backlogs?
Well, I can tell you that the challenges that we've identified that agencies are facing with backlogs are, number one, as you already have mentioned, the steady increase in incoming requests. Secondly, staffing has been at its lowest level. This past fiscal year, it was lower than it's been for 6 years. So resources, hiring freezes, government shutdowns where requests can come in, but there's no one at the government that can process them. They all impact.
So, Ms. Pouste,
backlogs.
with that, you're talking about the decreases.
Right.
Your Office of Information Policy during fiscal year 2014, there were 3,838 full-time FOIA staff devoted to the administration of FOIA throughout the government. We understand that that is a 9% decrease in the amount of full-time FOIA staff from the year before. But does that figure sound correct?
Right. Well, it's certainly not the size of OIP. We're about 43 people at OIP. So I think you're talking about the
Throughout government.
Throughout
to handle
government. Sorry, yes.
FOIA requests.
Yes, so definitely the staffing levels across the government have decreased.
And how does that impact the processing of these FOIA requests?
We are trying very hard to find ways to gain efficiencies in processing, utilizing technology, and that's a big factor that a big area where we've been putting a lot of emphasis. And there are efficiencies to be gained with technology. But at the end of the day, you do need trained FOIA professionals who can analyze documents for disclosability. And so there should just no substitute for personnel to actually handle requests.
It's your belief that having additional staff to process these backlogs, as well as the additional FOIA requests that come in, would be the best way in which to handle these backlogs?
I think having resources for both staff and technology together would be a very effective way.
Ms. Newman, would you agree that that would help your agency?
In my case, I don't want to get too far ahead of the independent review that I mentioned. We also are deploying technology because doing so does create efficiencies, but I can't dispute at this point the value of staff resources along with the enhanced use of technology.
And Secretary Barr, Ambassador Barr, would you say that would assist you as well?
Yes, I do believe it would assist me, but I think that, you know, within many agencies, we are all trying to meet our priorities, and
so are the
also-
FOIA requests a priority?
yes, it is a priority.
So
but
what
it
would be
is-
the best way to address that priority?
I think we have to continue to work with technology to see if we can gain additional efficiencies. But I also see that the increasing requests are also part of the American public's increasing interest in what we do. And I don't expect that to abate anytime.
So then how do you address it? With the
I think-
technology alone or with staff as well?
Some staff as well, but I know we are all competing for resources kind of.
Well, that's
within
what you come to
limit.
Congress for, is to ask us for those resources. So you have an opportunity here to do that, and I would think that you would avail yourself of that opportunity.
Yes, ma'am.
Wait.
I yield back my time.
Before you yield back, if you'll yield me a moment.
Of course, Mr. Chairman, always.
M-
Well, not
Ms.
always, but in this instance, yes.
Let's get through the question first, and then we'll see. Yeah, Ms. Boustay, you said across government that resources are down, and if I heard you correct, Mr. Fontenot, can you please clarify from your perspective what's happening? You wrote in your testimony something different than that.
Yes, at the Treasury-wide, over the past several years, we've increased our resources related to FOIA. Specifically, we have, at the end of 2014, we had 151 full-time equivalent employees working in FOIA, and that's a 21% increase over the prior 2 years.
So to say that personnel resources across the board government-wide, Ms. Boustay, are down is not accurate. In fact, Mr. Fontenot wrote in his testimony, beginning in 2013, my team doubled the number of full-time employees dedicated to FOIA. That's not a decrease, it's an increase, quite dramatic, actually. We appreciate the dedication and commitment that you've made, Mr. Fontenot.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just correct the characterization. When I'm giving the figure about staffing being decreased, I'm giving an overall number. The number of requests overall has increased. Overall,
I understand the
staffing has
request,
decreased.
but you were talking about personnel and
And
to
I'm
deal
giving-
with those. And some agencies have evidently prioritized it more than others because they doubled the number of personnel at the Department
I'm
of
giving the
Treasury.
figure for overall. Each agency reports in their annual FOIA report their number of FOIA staffing, so it's very easy to look right on FOIA.gov to see which agencies increased, which decreased, the exact numbers for all of them. It's
And
all
you said they
publicly
all
available.
decreased, and Mr. Fontenot said he doubled it.
My statement is, and I'm sorry that it's misunderstood, was that overall staffing has decreased. Government figure overall, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but just, Gentleman, yield. Just real quick, I understand what you were saying about overall, because I said it in my opening statement.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to make sure we're clear, although there are agencies that may have increased, overall, government with regard to FOIA personnel has decreased.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And further yielding, part of my point is, it's in their best, some think that's in their best interest to just slow this thing down, just ride it out, and others have given it more priority. But anyway, we'll continue the discussion. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the wake of the Edward Snowden revelations, obviously there's been a debate and public outcry over what some are seeing as the government's overly aggressive reaches into people's personal lives. I don't think most people would question that the need for the government to retain secrecy in certain areas to protect our national security is important. In my mind, though, there's still an important role for FOIA requests to shine a light on government actions that might not be in line with the core values that make our country great. Ms. Newman, I want to ask you, with decreased funding and a shrinking number of FOIA staff, what has the effect been on the public's ability to maintain that visibility and that transparency and to hold judicial, legislative, and executive branches accountable?
Well, certainly with the backlog, that has impacted the speed with which we can respond to requests and fulfill those requests. I will say that DHS processed 238,031 requests, up from 204,332 in fiscal year 2013. So that's a 16% increase in the number of processed FOIA requests from the previous fiscal year. Is it where I would like to see it? No, of course not. I would like to see greater improvements precisely to fulfill the values of transparency and shining a light on executive branch operations, as you note, that's embodied in the statute.
Great.
And our professionals are working very hard to fulfill those requests and shine that light.
It wouldn't hurt to have more professionals doing this man and woman power work, right?
Well, let me answer that this way. These are lean times for all federal agencies, as you know.
Well, you're being very diplomatic, Ms. Newman, and I appreciate it, but I have to move on. In his testimony, David McCraw says that there are three primary areas of FOIA delays that need to be addressed. First, a culture of unresponsiveness. Second, agencies deferring responses to other agencies. And third, that there are times when the information being requested has been submitted by companies to regulators, and so the agency has had to resolve private industry privacy concerns. Congress has been working on legislation to expedite the sharing of cyber threat information, not just between private companies, but also within the government. Now, here on this committee, we have passed out of this committee with approval H.R. 653. This committee reported it out with approval this year. Ms. Puste, would you comment on 653? Are you familiar with that legislation?
I'm not prepared to comment on any specific legislation, Congressman. Okay. I certainly can speak to some of the concepts that you just mentioned.
Well, let's do that. Do you have recommendations on how these efforts might be applied to increasing government transparency?
Well, I think one of the key things that we've been doing, just to take an example, after meeting with civil society representatives during my tenure as director of OIP, I have been very impacted by the fact that the basic concept of better communication can really go a long way to making the FOIA process seem more understandable and flow more smoothly and prevent disputes from happening. So in that sense, it's been a focus of mine. I have done 2 separate guidance articles on the importance of good customer service and making sure that requesters understand what's happening with their requests, that they have a point of contact at an agency.
Oh, good. I don't mean to cut you off,
No,
but
sure.
would you forward those to my office?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I thank you for that. I want to conclude by following up something Mr. Connolly from Virginia was talking about. And he was talking about Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice's emails. And Ms. Barr, you were testifying that your understanding is that she used an official account to do emails, although you had not ever seen one of those emails from her on that account or any other. My information is that Secretary Rice has not disclosed whether she used a personal email account for official business. She has not disclosed whether she used a private email account for official business. And Ms. Barr, can you confirm or deny that? Do you know either way on that question? It's a yes or no, and I have to hurry. Yes or no? Do you know?
Secretary Rice told us that she did not use personal email for official business.
Well, I'm going to invite
That
my
we
dear
have.
friend from South Carolina, who I know is looking into the question of emails of secretaries of state, to really delve into the question of whether Secretary Condoleezza Rice used private email accounts for official business. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all of our witnesses. Ms. Barr, you previously testified that the former secretary's email arrangement with herself was not acceptable. Those are the words you used, not acceptable. What made it not acceptable to you?
I thought that, I know that in my oral statement today I was talking about it. Our backlogs were not acceptable, but I think that in my former testimony that was being asked if I thought in general it was okay to use if any employee would use a private email account.
Right. No, you're exactly right. It was in response to a question when you testified before the Senate. And I'm sure the circumstances were, was it okay to exclusively use personal email with which to conduct public business? And you used the phrase not acceptable. So I'm not asking about the backlog. I'm asking about the exclusive use of personal email with which to conduct public business. What makes it not acceptable?
What we want to make sure that we do under the Federal Records Act is to capture official records so that they are available to be history of what we do and how we come to those decisions. We don't like for records to be separated from the agency. So we were very pleased to have these records back in our possession so that they're part of our collection and that we can make them available to the public.
Do you recall why former Secretary Clinton said she availed herself of a personal server and used exclusively personal email? Do you recall the explanation given? Or have you been given an explanation for why she went that route?
I can't speak to that authoritatively. My understanding is that the Secretary said that she did it as a matter of convenience.
And you know what?
I don't know that personally. So.
Well, that's my understanding too, in part because that's what she said. I guess my next question would be, if it was solely for convenience, why not return the records the day you separated from the State Department?
I have no information on that, sir.
Has she provided any explanation for why she retained care, custody, and control of those public records for almost 2 years after she separated?
I'm not aware of that, sir.
Do you know what
prompted now?
Do you know what prompted the former secretary to return those public records to the public domain?
We sent a letter to Secretary Clinton as well as to Secretaries Rice, Powell, and Albright, and asked them if they had any records that they might have been generated on non-department systems that should be part of our official records.
How were you able to comply with FOIA requests in that almost 2-year interim between the time you wrote the letter and the time that she retained care, custody, and control of all of those public records?
Sir, emails are not the only records.
Right, but it's part of the
use.
record. So if you received a FOIA request that would have included emails, how would you have been able to comply with that FOIA request, given the fact that you had neither care, custody, nor control of those records?
Well, we would still search all of our records, and we would still look at things like cables, decision memos, other types of documents that we keep to provide a record of what we do, agendas.
So you would have given what you had, but you would have made no representation that what you provided was complete, because necessarily it could not have been complete because you didn't have the full panoply of public records.
Well, we always look at what we have, sir. But
Right. You can't give it if you don't have it, which then raises the next question I have. I was listening to my friend from Maryland and my friend from Virginia make note of the fact that the former secretary did return emails. What guarantee can you give my fellow citizens that what you have now is the complete public record? Have you been through all of her records to determine what's public and what's private?
We are processing them now, and I know we have not completed our review.
You're processing what was originally on the server, or are you processing what she provided to you?
We are processing what she provided to us.
Do you know what mechanism she would have gone through to determine herself what was public record and what was private, or what may have been a mixed use? Do you know who made that initial determination for the former secretary?
She has told us that she erred on the side of inclusion.
Did she tell you that she personally reviewed all of the emails, or did she retain counsel to do so?
I'm not aware of whether she personally did it or if she retained counsel.
Well, I thank you for answering my questions. I am over time. Suffice it to say, I have a number of additional questions in this area, and perhaps at some point I'll be able to ask them to you.
Gentlemen,
But thank
just
you.
for a moment.
I'm out of time, but if the chairman says I'm not, then I'm not.
Just one question. Ms. Barr, what emails are you processing for Secretary Powell, Secretary, and Secretary Rice? You said you're processing emails.
Oh, for Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, but what emails are you processing for Secretary Powell? And listen to me, Secretary Powell, any?
No.
Are you processing for any for Secretary Rice?
No.
All right, thank you.
Now I recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
And I understand, Ms. Barr, that while we have the Secretary Clinton's, we don't have any from Secretary Powell because he didn't save his. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Now, when we get a chronic problem like this that keeps coming back, we often set up an officer or another department or another part of the government to help us out. So I noticed that, of course, indeed, in fact, in H.R. 653, there's the creation of a Chief FOIA Officer Council. It would be run jointly by the DOJ's Office of Information Policy and the Office of Government Information. This question is initially for Ms. Puste, because your office would be tasked to run the Office of Government and Information Services. Do you support the notion of a Chief FOIA Officers Council?
I'm not prepared today to answer any specific questions about a specific legislative proposal. But what I can tell you is that chief FOIA officers who are designated high-level officials within each agency, designated by law with the FOIA as it currently exists, I think are really a key, really hold the key to helping improve FOIA across the government. And we do a lot to work with chief FOIA officers, because the idea there is that you want a high-level official in every agency who has authority and responsibility to make sure that the FOIA operations have sufficient staffing, have sufficient attention, have the resources that they need to operate. And gearing off that important role that a chief FOIA officer plays, starting in 2009 with the Attorney General Holder's FOIA guidelines, we created a mechanism called the Chief FOIA Officer Report. And every year we at OIP, at the Department of Justice, we ask chief FOIA officers to report to us every year on the steps they've taken to improve FOIA compliance. And we address a range of issues: use of technology, proactive disclosures, timeliness in responding to a request. And every year we have been changing the metrics that we ask and the questions that we ask of those chief FOIA officers, because as we see FOIA processes improve, or as we see steps taken to improve FOIA, we want to keep pushing agencies to do more and to do better. So it's an evolving process for us. So I think that we have a lot of really good mechanisms in place right now that take advantage of the position of the chief FOIA officer.
Well, let me turn to the chief FOIA officers. How do each of you feel about the notion of a chief FOIA officers council? Would it be beneficial to you in any way?
You know, it's an interesting idea. I would have to give that some thought, and after doing so, I would be happy to share my thoughts with you.
Have you given any thoughts to that, Mr.? You are the ones that it seems to me ought to be consulted with this, about this.
Yes, ma'am. I have not given thought to this as of now, but I'm happy to take that back.
Well, I think the committee would benefit from your advice and counsel, particularly since there has been a subcommittee hearing here. The subcommittee on government operations had a FOIA hearing and heard from Frederick Sadler. He has previously served as a FOIA officer at the Food and Drug Administration. And let me read to you what he said. It would seem appropriate to require agency representation at the highest level possible when the individual is also the most knowledgeable. Past experience has shown that not every chief FOIA officer has the skill set, since this is by definition not necessarily that individual's specialty. Ms. Barr, I'll start with you. Do you agree with Mr. Sadler's comment?
I think it would depend on how that person, you know, each agency organizes this issue differently. For the State Department, I'm the Chief FOIA officer, but I also have a lot of other responsibilities. So I have a Deputy Assistant Secretary that is an expert in these issues, and I consult very closely with that person.
Well, what about the exchange of ideas across agency lines? Do you believe that sharing of information about agency experience and their ideas, their own best practices, what they've done right or wrong, would improve the implementation of FOIA? Would the FOIA officers have a view on that?
I mean, I can certainly tell you that we definitely think that's incredibly important, and we have many mechanisms to share best practices. We have what I mentioned in my testimony was the creation of a best practices workshop series, where the whole idea is to identify a topic. And as I mentioned, our very first topic was improving timeliness and reducing backlogs, and then identify agencies that have achieved success in that area, and then have them come and speak to a gathering of anyone, every interested agency employee, and share their best practices so that we can leverage success across the government. Then what we've done at OIP is take that even further in that we've created a dedicated web page on OIP's website. We're connected to the best practices workshop series, where we list the best practices that came out of each of these sessions. We've also issued guidance in relation to the best practices. So it's something that we've been doing already for a full year now, and we feel that it's been very successful, and it's a very important way to have agencies be able to capitalize on the good things and the innovations that one another's doing.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield my time to the gentleman from South Carolina.
I thank my friend from North Carolina. Ms. Barr, I appreciate you talking with me earlier. I want to pick back up where we were. I was seeking some level of assurance from you, to the extent that you could give one, that what was produced to the State Department did in fact represent the full universe of what would be public records. And again, I have no interest in private documents. I really could care less. I am interested in making sure the whole public universe is complete. So what assurance can you give the public that that State Department has everything that would be considered a public record from her tenure as Secretary of State?
She has assured us that she gave us everything she had, and like we do with other federal employees, we have to depend on them to provide that information to us. So we have the documents, and you know, we've accepted her assurance that she's given us everything that she had, that should be a part of our official records.
Well, you mentioned other federal employees, which got me wondering, and I wrote down a list of some of the other cabinet level folks that I have worked with in my time here. Attorney General Holder, did he have his own server?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking whoever can answer it.
Well, I can let you know that Attorney General Holder used an official DOJ account.
He did. How about new Attorney General Lynch? Does she have a personal server?
Same as well. She's using an official DOJ account.
What about President Obama? Is there any indication? Because if you're going to pursue the theory of convenience, I can't really imagine a busier person on the globe than President Obama. Did he have his own personal server? Ms. Barr?
I have no knowledge.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because you said that you're doing it the exact same way you would with any other public official, and my point is because of this arrangement that the former secretary had with herself, you're not in a position to do it the same as you would with any other public official because Vice President Biden and President Obama don't have their personal attorneys going through their emails to decide what to return and what not to return. I assume in your position is an apolitical, non-political, unbiased position. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, sir.
And I believe the Department of State has an Inspector General. Am I right?
Yes, and we've asked the Inspector General to look into some of these issues. We are cooperating with them.
I know you have, and I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. Do you know who nominated the current Inspector General?
I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I can get back to you.
You don't have to because it was President Obama. Do you know who controlled the Senate when he was confirmed? Do you know what the vote was? It was unanimous.
No, I knew you were going to give me that information.
It was unanimous. Those may be the only questions I can answer today, but I do know the answer to those two. President Obama nominated the current Inspector General, and he was unanimously confirmed by a Senate controlled at the time by Democrats, which makes me think that he, like you, is a neutral, detached arbiter who is solely interested in separating what should be in the public domain from what should be purely personal. So why not let the Inspector General look at all the records just to make absolutely sure, and that way we're not in a position of having to take someone's lawyer's word for it. Why not do that?
Well, it was my understanding that, you're talking about the email collection, not the entire process?
No, I'm talking about, I mean, you have been put in the position of having to take a lawyer's word that you have all the public records. And perhaps it's just the cynicism of actually being a lawyer. I'm just wondering who with a fiduciary duty to the public can make sure that the public record is complete. Instead of the former secretary hiring an attorney to do it, why can't the attorney that works for all of us, why can't the Inspector General do it?
So you're asking me, why can't the Inspector General make the determination of whether we received all of the emails?
Yes.
I really can't speculate on that.
Well, I'm out of time. Hopefully I'll get some more time and we can speculate together after that. I'll yield back to the chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Dunker for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having these hearings. This is very, very important, and I would simply say that the record that we heard, the testimony we heard in here yesterday, the record on this FOIA, these FOIA requests is simply horrendous. We heard in here yesterday Cheryl Atkinson say that FOIA is a pointless, useless shadow of its former self. She testified that it took over 10 years, 10 or 11 years to get a request that she submitted. Another witness, Mr. Leopold, said the Pentagon agreed to, told him it would take 15 years to give him material, and they said they would only give it to him if he would agree never to file another FOIA request. And of course, then court ruled in his favor and said it was ridiculous that they came up with that 15-year business. Mr. McCraw from the New York Times, who said that the New York Times, just that one business, had to file 8 different lawsuits last year, FOIA lawsuits, and I'm told that there were 422 FOIA lawsuits just in 2014. We had another witness, Cleta Mitchell, who told about the years she had spent litigating FOIA and brought in here numerous, probably looked like about 10 or 12 notebooks full of pages that finally were sent to her with practically everything, thousands of pages, with 100% of those 100% on most of those pages totally redacted, and it really was just useless. I can tell you the American people think the federal government is already far too big, too out of control, and far too secret. And the American people are not going to stand for more secrecy from the federal government. And I would say to each of you and to any of FOIA officers that might be listening that if you don't start doing better, this committee, this Congress is going to have to come down very, very hard and come up with some legislation that I'm sure none of you are going to want to live with at all. But Ms. Puste, can you assure me that if Chairman Chaffetz calls a hearing a year from now, that we're going to hear a much better story than we've heard these past couple of days? I mean, you talked about timeliness and all these things that sound good, but surely you don't accept or don't defend a system that takes 10 or 15 years to grant simple requests.
No, of course not. I'm looking, and the whole, what we do every day at OIP is work very hard to try to help agencies improve their administration of the FOIA. And we do that through a number of ways. And we want fundamentally for all agency professionals who are handling FOIA requests to understand the law and understand their obligations. And that's why we focus so much on training, and why we're so happy that we were able to complete e-learning training resources that are now available to anyone anywhere in the world free of charge, because at its foundation, we need trained FOIA professionals. But we also want to make sure that there's good customer service, as I've mentioned, so that requesters understand the process and know what's happening. We also want to use technology to find greater efficiencies in processing FOIA requests so that we can proceed more quickly. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and we're trying very hard to help agencies do better.
Well, I'm assuming that there are some requests that are granted without, I hope that there's some requests being granted without going or forcing lawsuits over it, but I'm told that almost all of these lawsuits, these FOIA lawsuits, have ended up with rulings in favor of the plaintiffs and against the department.
I mean, respectfully, Congressman, that's really just not accurate. The number of lawsuits is really small in comparison to the number of requests. We get 700,000 requests, 400 some lawsuits, so it's like 1% of requests go to law. We don't want anybody to have to go. It's an important right to have judicial review of an agency's action, but of course we don't want requesters to feel that that's where they have to go. We want to have
well, do you agree that this system, that you need to do better, that this system must be improved and must be faster?
We're constantly looking for ways to improve it, and we constantly want things to be faster. I just also want to say that in terms of the results of litigation, the Administrative Conference on U.S. Courts, ACUS, did a study of just that exact point of who prevails and who doesn't prevail in FOIA lawsuits. And they found that year after year, the government prevailed in FOIA lawsuits over 80% of the time. So I want to correct that misstatement that was conveyed to you.
You do accept the fact that when we have requests that are taking 10 or 15 years to grant, that a system is broken.
Of course, it's not that the system is broken. The system works well for many requesters. And I mean, since 2009, agencies have responded to nearly 4 million requests. So every time a student gets their information for their paper or a reporter gets information for his article, that's a success story for FOIA. But at the same time, I'm not saying there's not problems, and I'm not saying there's not areas where we can improve. And that's what I try to focus on in my office really every single day, is to try to help agencies improve.
Well, we heard yesterday about some problems that we shouldn't have been hearing about, I can tell you that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Ms. Howard, you had an exchange earlier. I apologize I couldn't be here, but you had an exchange with the chairman where you referenced a special project team that was created to deal with requests for information concerning the targeting and a former employee at the Internal Revenue Service, Lois Lerner. I just had some basic questions. When did this special project team start?
My understanding was that it started soon after the request came from Congress and other investigators asking for documents around this whole issue. So that would have been somewhere in the
About 2 years ago?
early summer of 2013.
Yeah, about 2 years ago. Okay, it's been a little over 2 years since we had. And that was the reason why, to deal with requests from Congress?
Yeah, I think this is very...
Or was it also requests from outside folks, people like we heard from yesterday who represented groups who had been targeted? Was it to deal with that as well?
It was, because there was a recognition that most of the documents would be responsive to both Congress, the investigators, and the FOIAs, and so we centralized the whole process for gathering them and redacting them for...
And was that unusual for the IRS to do such a thing, to create such an entity?
I think it was a normal response to an unusual situation. I see the IRS do this on an ongoing basis when we have surges of work or
So
things
it's
that
not
we have to
unusual for them to
implement
put
quickly.
together a special team?
It's not unusual for us to gather together resources that are going to be focused on
Are
achieving...
they called special teams? I mean, I'm using the words you
Yeah,
special
no,
project.
and if I gave you the impression there was a title called special team, that's probably not
I'm just
correct.
using what you said, special project team.
It was a project team put together.
Okay. And who was on that team?
My firsthand knowledge of that is none.
You can't tell us who's on it?
I can't tell you who was on it. No, I know that it was made up mostly of chief counsel, their attorneys. They pulled them offline to work on them. We took resources that were familiar with 6103.
Okay, let me stop you there. You mentioned chief counsel. So was
Yes.
the chief counsel at the Internal Revenue Service part of the special project team created shortly after it became known that there was targeting going on approximately 2 years ago?
I have no personal knowledge. You would have to ask him or the commissioner that.
But, well, I mean, we'll do that. Is it your assumption, or do you believe, you're the one who brought special counsel, both in your response to Mr. Chaffetz earlier, or not special counsel, chief counsel,
Right.
but you think the chief counsel was part of the team?
I think there were hundreds of attorneys that were part of the team, and I think that it was a production team. It was
Okay.
a way to amass documents
Okay.
and mass produce them.
All right. And you were asked by the chairman earlier about do you have any interaction with the White House before you release information? And I'm quoting from what your response: to the extent that I've been involved in responses to Congress or to FOIA, we have never shared information with the White House. Accurate? That was
Yes.
your response? You go on to say in that same answer to the chairman, I can't speak for the entire IRS. That would be a question for the chief counsel or the commissioner. I can simply speak for the Disclosure Office and FOIA progress. We do not interact with the White House. Do you know if the special project team that was put together, gathering all this information, most likely had the chief counsel on it? Do you know if they were checking with the White House before they gave information to Congress and or other FOIA requests?
I have no personal knowledge of how that team acted, except that I know that they amassed hundreds of attorneys to go through the documents and redact them for 6103.
Do you think it was likely that the chief counsel talked with the White House before he gave information to Congress?
I think it's unlikely, but I don't know.
You think it's unlikely? Well, that would be in direct contradiction to the memo sent to every chief counsel back when this administration first started, April 15, 2009. The need to consult with the White House arises with respect to all types of document requests, including congressional committee requests, GAO requests, judicial subpoenas, and FOIA requests. So we have this memo from Greg Craig to all chief counsels You're telling me it's likely the chief counsel of the IRS was part of this special project team created just to deal with requests about the targeting and lowest learner, and then you're saying you think it's unlikely that they actually checked with the White House, which would be a direct contradiction to what they were told to do by the White House chief counsel.
Except that the memo does specify documents with White House equities. I'm not sure that the documents we have.
You don't think the White House has an interest in knowing about information related to the Internal Revenue Service targeting people? You don't think they have an interest in that? Equities is an interest, right? They have an interest in that. This is pretty, all document requests that may involve White House interest. That's pretty broad. And then the next paragraph gives clarification to that and says, congressional committee requests, which you said is the reason this special project team was created, not to mention GOA requests, judicial responses, and FOIA requests. So I would say if the chief counsel, who's most likely part of this special project team, which is something I think we're going to find out, and the chairman will be pushing for that, if he's likely part of this special project team, he wouldn't be following the memo if he wasn't consulting with the White House. You agree?
Sir, the special project team was put together not because the responses were due to Congress, but because of the volume and the number of investigators and the scope of the documents that were needed. It was a business reason, a business process.
Well, I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Well, I'm going to recognize myself. I have a series of questions I need to do before we wrap up, and members may have some other questions. Ms. Howard, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the IT challenges that the IRS has and what you're dealing with. What sort of software are you dealing with, and how bad is it?
Well, I think, I believe it was Congressman Carter when he was speaking, referred to the fact that he had an opportunity to go onto a search engine on his personal computer. He put in a few keywords that had to do with FOIA. He pushed a button and he got all kinds of responses. That's just not the way it works in IRS. We don't have that library of electronic documents that we can go in and search through a Google or Bing or any of the other search engines that you might have. We need the ability to actually tag those records so that we know what they are, who created them, how they're created.
Can you do keyword searches?
We can do keyword searches within accounts. So that means if you're going to look for emails, I would have to look at your account, my account, anyone's account that might be involved, account by account, and then look within each of those emails.
You can't do a massive look into...
It involves downloading everything into some sort of massive database.
What software do you use?
And that would be a question for the IT person or the commissioner.
You don't know what software you use on your computer?
What software I use on my computer?
Yeah.
I have a Microsoft suite of products, including Outlook, Exchange.
So you use Outlook.
Mm-hmm.
You can't type a word into Outlook and search your database?
I can my own account.
We'll have to dive deeper into this. And I'd like actually if each of the 5 of you can help us understand how bad or how good you think the IT situation is.
But you know, I just want to add too, that once you get the documents, you still have to go through line by line by line to look for 6103 redactions and then the other exemptions within FOIA. So it's not just about the IT, but certainly that's a huge thing in IRS.
Ms. Newman, you mentioned the budget detail worksheet that would be released in June of this year, which be any time. Do you have that yet? And if so, can you provide it to this committee?
I do not have that yet. I will be happy to.
Sorry, you got to be a little closer to the mic there. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm not aware that it's been completed yet. I will check with my Deputy Chief FOIA officer, and if it has, I will be happy to certainly
when it
provide
is
it to you.
complete, and you didn't represent that it was complete, but when it is complete, can you please share that with
Absolutely.
this committee? One of the questions we have is about the charges that are given to the public and the expenses that they have. Let me start with you. Let me go back to Ms. Howard here. Oftentimes people are frustrated because the law says you need to respond within 20 days. You can give another 10-day extension, but then oftentimes it's months before they hear again. How do you pick those dates?
I think mainly they're just an approximation of when we think the document production will be done. Certainly in the case of the C4 issues or the C4 cases, No, we had just no idea the volume of documents that would be required and how long it would actually take for the responses to Congress and the investigators to be completed.
So when you do the search, you send a request out to anybody you think might have it, and you count on them to individually do it? You're not able to, you're not at a,
Yes,
you're not, there's not a FOIA officer that can get in there and do a search term, pull up every relevant email or
no, because
document?
there's no library. There's no massive
Well, there
data
is. There
storage.
isn't. This is
You
a
can- you-
fallacy. It's wrong to say there's no library. It's called email. And the reason we moved away from carbon copies and big warehouses with stacks and volumes of file folders is because electronically you can push a button, do a search, and generate that. This is you know, the year 2015 here. We're not in the Stone Ages trying to knock something out on a and copy it on a stone.
It's
So don't tell
frustrating
me
for
there's
us
not a database. It's called email.
It's
And it's called Microsoft. They're a big company.
folder by folder by folder by folder, account by account by account by account.
And it's magic. You get a 28-year-old IT person in there, and they can find that in a couple hours. And that's why we don't believe you. This is why we don't believe you. Don't say there's not a database. It's called email. Right? I mean,
My understanding is that the capabilities of the system we have do not enable us to do that except account by account by account.
and I just fundamentally and totally do not understand that. And I don't understand how you all pick dates. Can you please try to explain? We don't have time because, I mean, it would take you 10 minutes each to try to explain this. The frustration for so many people is they don't get exposure. They don't know when they, and sometimes they last months and years. Sometimes it's very legitimate. They need some exposure to that, but there seems to be this great deal of mystery as to why you say, well, it'll be July, and then July comes, and next thing you know, it's October, and it just seems like a slow walk. So can you help explain to us why you and how you pick the dates? I also would appreciate from Homeland Security if they could help us understand the new rulemaking that they're involved with FOIA. The FOIA law is the law, so why do you have to develop new rulemaking, and what in the world is that going to look like?
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah.
Yes. So the GAO report recommended that we finalize our interim FOIA regulation, which embodies FOIA policy and guidance at the department. The rulemaking process is underway. We are preparing to issue it for public comment, and after which we will review the comments very carefully, and the rule will be finalized.
We will be watching that, because if Homeland Security thinks that they're going to come up with a whole nother new set of rules that's different, this is, again, one of the frustrations. FOIA is what FOIA is, but every time you go to a different department and agencies, they got an old set of standards. They got different rules. They don't have standards where you just plug and play and operate equally, and that's a frustration.
And the rule is really an implementing regulation, is not intended, nor do I believe.
We're fascinated to see it. The other thing I'm terribly frustrated at is this, we talked about the scorecard, and I believe this is put out by the Department of Justice, right? You come in and do this evaluation, and there's a color-coded scheme here, and it's different categories of presumption of openness, effective system in place for responding, proactive disclosure, improved timeliness and backlog reduction.
Right.
And you know, if you sat and listened to some testimony of today and compare it to yesterday, I mean, we had as wide array of people as you can possibly have, from individuals to the New York Times, to the ACLU, to a former CBS News reporter, to Vice, I mean, we got as wide of a swatch of people as we possibly could. And there wasn't anybody that believed that in general, things were going well. And yet, when you do your own scorecard, for instance, at the Department of Justice, you're solid green. You gave yourself 5 out of 5 on presumption of openness, 5 out of 5 on an effective system in place for responding, proactive disclosure. Are you kidding me? The Department of Justice gives themselves a 5 out of 5 on proactive disclosure. You really think anybody in the world believes the Department of Justice is the most, they're at the top of their game? They got an A+, 5 for 5. Do you really believe that?
I do.
Man,
I absolutely do.
You live in la-la land. That's the problem.
I live in
You
the
live
real
in
world,
fantasy
Todd.
land because it ain't working. You're a very nice person, and I'm sure most of the people are very nice people. It ain't working. 550,000 times Americans put forward a request and got a rejection saying doesn't qualify. You think that's working? Is that a presumption of openness? Do you think that's proactive disclosure? I beg to differ. I think it's absolutely fundamentally wrong. We're at the heart of why I think there is a problem, because you all think you're doing a great job.
Right. We are constantly evaluating, not just how we do at DOJ. But
And your
how
evaluation
agencies-
says you have no room for improvement.
Oh, that's not true at all.
Then why do you give yourself 5 out of 5?
You aren't looking at the whole.
Yes,
all
I
the
am.
Different
I'll go
categories.
through each and every one of them. I just read the different disclosures, and here it is in green, all green.
We have green for proactive disclosures. Proactive disclosures are making available to the public information.
Presumption of openness?
Exactly. The
Effective system in place for responding.
responding to requests.
Really, you got an effective system for, like, we can argue about this. I beg to differ. We had 11, 12 people yesterday that absolutely differ. On a bipartisan way, I don't think there's anybody that would agree with you that across the board, most every one of you got great scores. And I just don't buy that. I want to ask specifically about the Department of Justice. Are you able to conduct an electronic search, or do you rely on the individual agency employees to proactively give you the information?
This, what you're talking about, I think, is a really important improvement to FOIA administration. And we do have within OIP the tools that are more sophisticated tools that are used in the e-discovery context, which allow individual email accounts to be dumped or be collected into one bucket.
So you search the universal index, is that right?
And, well, I don't think it's called a universal index, but we have tools that allow us to
The
search.
UNI?
We have tools that allow us to search multiple email custodians simultaneously. And we, in fact—
Do you search the electronic case files?
We do sometimes. It depends on what we would only search case files if case files were relevant to a particular FOIA request. You know, we have lots of different offices. What I want to emphasize is that technology is incredibly important to FOIA administration. And we've been at the forefront of pushing for use of more sophisticated technology to process and handle FOIA requests. We did a pilot at DOJ several years ago to show the benefits of being able to do things like searching multiple custodians at the same time.
Okay, so my understanding is that the FBI conducts a search on it does conduct searches on the universal index, but that system does not allow for text-based searches. But the FBI does not search the electronic case files, which contain uploaded versions of the Bureau's non-restricted investigative records, and the ECF, as it's called, the electronic case file, is text searchable. And that's the disconnect.
Right.
I don't expect you on this spot to respond to that, but I do want you to get back to us on this specific point, if you would.
Sure.
Okay. I have a few more questions, but I want you to kind of each go down the line here. We went through with Ms. Howard here, but let's go back to Ms. Barr. This is my last set of questions before I change my mind and ask another one. I want to know, what is the instruction that you believe you've been given to interact with the White House? What percentage of the documents do you give to the White House or somebody who represents the White House? What is the expectation that you share information with them? Do you need their approval before you send it back? How does that work? Because this directive is really concise, clear, short. It's 3 paragraphs. I mean, they essentially want you to give them everything. And so my question is, what do you have to do in order to fulfill the demand from the White House that you give them everything before you give it to us or to the media or to the judicial branch?
Well, we have a standard process that we follow for FOIA, and it does include, if the White House has an equity in a document that we're working on, we do consult with them as appropriate, but we follow the standard FOIA process.
How do you determine if it's a White House equity? I mean, what is not an equity?
What we do, when we get a request in, we have a team of reviewers, and many of these reviewers, because so much of our work deals with things overseas, for the most part, they're retired Foreign Service officers, and some of them are even foreign ambassadors. In fact, we have quite a few. they look at it, we decide where we need to search for documents, and then once we get the results of that document search back, then we go through line by line, and at that point, we look at whether or not we need to coordinate with other agencies. And that would be when we would include the White House if, after they get these materials back, they decide that they have an interest in that document.
And who at the White House do you send them to?
I'm not familiar with who exactly, but
If you could
I
let
can
us know,
take
we'd
that
appreciate
back.
it. Ms.
Yes.
Ms. Boustay?
What I can tell you is that the process of consulting with other agencies, which would include the White House, has not changed. This memo reflects the same practice that we've had administration to administration. I've been doing this a long time. And the word equity is really just sort of a more modern term, but what is captured by the memo and what has been consistent from administration to administration is that when an agency finds communications that originated with another entity or that reflect a communication with the other entity, that's when an agency, as a matter of good practice, consults with that other entity to get their views on the sensitivity of the material. And oftentimes that can include, of course, getting their views that it's okay to release the material. So it's communications is what happens the memo.
And I think it's a big source of why it's so slowed down. So what percentage of the information do you have to share to the White House before you share it with us?
Yeah, I can speak obviously just of FOIA requests. I don't know the percentage of requests that have the equity of any particular.
Okay, Ms. Newman?
Yes, it's my understanding with respect to the White House, this happens very infrequently.
Happens what?
Very infrequently. With DOJ.
Why? I mean, the memo says it should happen on everything.
Well, again, it's my understanding, and I don't process these requests or get involved in these kinds of consultations, but my understanding is that the kinds of requests we get don't involve, quote, White House equities. And of course, when the request comes in, there's if there's an indication that it is a request for White House records or White House information, that would trigger the consultation.
Well, no, it doesn't. So I'm not talking about White House. I'm saying if you have information in your possession at Homeland, and it comes from a member of Congress, the judicial branch, it was a FOIA request, a GAO request, that it should be shared with the White House.
And if we
You're telling me you don't do that?
No, I'm saying that we do. We follow DOJ issue guidelines that require consultation not only with the White House.
But what about the White House issued guidelines? Because I'm reading to you the guidelines. We handed you a copy of them. This is the guideline. You don't abide by it, or you do abide by it?
And we adhere to this memo in accordance with the DOJ guidance on that. We also report all such consultations publicly in our FOIA reports. So you asked a question about whether these consultations slow down or create additional delay in the process. I've implemented some procedures to try to minimize that delay or delay associated with any consultations, including directing a senior professional member of my FOIA team to be the point of contact for those consultations.
And they communicate with who at the White House?
I would have to ask them. I don't
We're not getting much. We'll try Mr. Fontenot.
Thank you. Again, I do not process specific FOIA requests, but Treasury follows the Department of Justice guidance from 2011 concerning FOIA referrals and consultations. We consult with agencies and entities concerning documents that originated at those agencies or in communication with those agencies. And obviously, in this respect, Treasury may consult with staff from the Executive Office of the President or the White House when those documents either originate or relate to the White House. And so, again, we treat the White House just like any other agency related to FOIA.
You were on a roll. I was believing everything you said until you said that last sentence. You're nuts if you think you treat the White House exactly the same you treat the Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's no way that's happening. So with all due respect, we're trying to get our hands and a grip on it. We would like some feedback on this. I think the director from the White House is crystal clear, and we'll continue to pursue that. Well over time, we'll now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, the ranking member.
Thank you very much. I think, a lot of times I sit in these hearings and I try to figure out where we're going. And you all have to help me help you. I said to you a little bit earlier, Ms. Newman, I wanted you all to get back to me with information as to all of you as to things that we could do to make things better. It's kind of hard to do that when you think you're almost perfect, though. I'm serious. I mean, some kind of way we gotta, you know, did you all watch the testimony? Did any of you all watch the testimony yesterday? Any of you? Hello? Anybody? All right, I'll go to Ms. Barr. Did you watch any of the testimony yesterday?
I just heard some of it, but I wanted to focus on preparing for today.
No problem. Did you?
Right. As I mentioned, was updated throughout the day on the testimony.
As was I while I was preparing for this hearing.
I watched part of the hearing. Yes, sir.
I watched most of it.
All right, fine. And when you hear the testimony that you all gave today compared to what we heard yesterday, it seems like a world of difference. And let me tell you what I think is part of the problem. I do think a personnel issue is part of the problem. I mean, logic tells you that when you've got less people than you are, and you've got more demand, you're going to have problems. I mean, period. I also think that there are a lot of things that you all are doing right. I mean, doing a great job at. And then I think there are some cases that are maybe a little bit more complicated, a little more controversial, and so the process is slowed down a little bit, and in some instances, perhaps a lot. In some kind of way, I think, and I mean, just listening to everything that's been said between yesterday and today, that's where I come down on this. And some kind of way, we got to get past where we are, because I think we could do better. It's easy to say that we are scoring excellent in every this, that. That ain't true, folks. It's not. So some kind of way, we've got to close this gap. And the only way we're going to do it is that we have to be frank with each other, and we've got to begin to set some kind of some I want to say goals, but the things that you, whatever you're going to send us back, of things that you should be doing that could be better, and set some deadlines with regard to making those things happen. Other than that, it's going to get worse. I'm telling you, it's going to get worse. So I'm hoping that you all will do that. I've discovered from being on this Hill for 20 years now almost, that you almost have to, we have to set deadlines to get things done. And I've also noticed that a lot of times people who come before us, they have a tendency sometimes to outweight us. In other words, they know that the Congress is going to change. They know that we're going to move on to something else. And then the next thing you know, things don't get done. And then they look towards the new Congress, and then it's worse. And then we just go through these circles over and over again. You have to have been here for a while to see this cycle, and I've seen it. So going to you, Ms. Barr, I want to just ask a few questions, because I want to clear up this thing. I mean, we making a big deal with regard to Secretary Clinton. My colleague, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, suggested that we should not take Secretary Clinton's word for the fact that she has produced all her emails relating to official business. He also suggested that Secretary Clinton's lawyers do not have any duty to ensure compliance with the federal records laws. But, Ms. Barr, let's look at former Secretary Rice. Last fall, the State Department asked her, along with other secretaries, for information about official emails on their personal accounts. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, former Secretary Rice did not respond to the department herself in response to your letter last fall. she had a representative do that. That's what it says in the State Department's report sent to the National Archives on this issue. Do you know who Secretary Rice's representative is?
No, not offhand, sir, but
Do you know whether it's an attorney?
I assume so, yes.
Okay. According to the report the department sent to the archives, former Secretary Rice's representative claimed that she did not use her personal email account for official business. Do you know what his assertion was based on? You have any idea?
Personally, just what was told to us. I don't have personal knowledge of what was said.
Okay. And so you don't know whether she told him that or he reviewed the documents? You don't know?
That is true.
Did you know if he thoroughly reviewed her personal email account to find emails relating to official business, or did he just take her word? You don't know. That's your testimony?
Yes.
So let me just state for the record that when dozens of White House officials under the Bush administration were using private email accounts at the RNC, we worked with their attorneys to ensure that they were recovering official emails and producing them. We did not suggest subpoenaing their servers. We relied on them to go through their documents, identify documents responsive to our requests, and produce them to us. Attorneys do have a legal obligation to provide us with truthful information, and this is the same process we use for virtually every investigation we conduct. Again, I just, as we close, Ms. Howard, I take it that you're getting ready to retire? Is that what you've been trying to tell us? You're not on your way out the door today, are you?
Not today, no.
How soon will you be gone?
I don't know. I think about that all the time. But
Take your time.
Like many people in IRS, I am eligible to retire, and what keeps me working is the dedication of my employees and the professionalism of my colleagues at IRS.
Well, we appreciate all of you and the employees that work with you. What can we do to improve the system?
Well, I think
then I'll be finished, Mr. Chairman. This is where I want to wrap up.
From our standpoint, we would like advanced technology. I think just to make it easier to do the searches. We would also like at IRS, we would like access to a really good FOIA system that would help us be more consistent and accurate with our redactions so that we could get more done with the same amount of people. The other thing that my folks do in disclosure, other than just the FOIAs, is they're responsible for doing 6103 redactions for subpoenaed information around litigation, and also for just making sure that the employees across IRS who have interaction with taxpayer knows the disclosure laws and have their questions about disclosure answered as they need them on a day-to-day basis. So we have those responsibilities too. And I think the technology would go a long way. We would like additional staff. I think, but what we see is a trend in the complexity of requests. So instead of requests being for mostly taxpayers asking for their own files, we're seeing more and more of the types of requests that you had witnesses speaking about yesterday that are very expansive in their scope and nature and rely on us going to multiple custodians to find and receive and retrieve those records, and then volumes and volumes of pages. So we need people who are trained well in those in the exemptions, and we need technology to help us with all of that.
Mr. Fortuno?
Again, thank you. I can obviously tell you what we have done. The department, we've added resources, we've added people, we've added better.
What about training?
We've added better data, and we've trained 100% of our FOIA professionals at the department. And I think that's yielding results. Again, we received about 14,000 requests overall last year, and we closed about 14,000 as well. Again, an improvement year over year.
Would you say that maybe, based upon what you just said,
yes, sir,
you have a situation of best practices there?
Again, we're always looking for best practices. We try to adopt as many best practices as we can from the Department of Justice. Our team works with them quite a bit. And so I think we're moving in the right direction, but obviously we can always improve.
Newman?
Yes, Congressman Cummings. I really appreciate the question, and I have been giving it quite a bit of thought. I think it's difficult, in my case, in the case of my agency, it's somewhat difficult to say right now because we are in the midst of this independent review that I have commissioned. I think it's really important that I personally understand what the actual systemic challenges are that are facing my agency, so that not only we can understand how to address those, but so that we can communicate back with you about what it is we actually need. Because it may be tempting to turn to what might seem like an obvious solution today, but that solution may not actually address what the actual problems are. I do think that FOIA, as a 40-plus-year-old statute, may not have contemplated the kind of technology that's available not only to seek information, but to respond to those requests. And to that extent, I think it's worthwhile considering how the statute might be updated. And otherwise, I think it's a very good question, and I'm interested in polling my FOIA unit. And along with that and the outcome of this review, I would be delighted to get back to you with my thoughts.
I'm hoping that you all will get back to me within 30 days. Yes. Would you all do that, please?
Certainly.
All right, go ahead, Ms.
Certainly. I think the number one thing from our perspective is that we really appreciate and need the support of Congress for adequate resources for FOIA. So that would help us both with personnel and with IT. They're both inextricably intertwined.
And training.
And training as well. Although we feel as though we've done very well with training, with the resources we've just made available. We've been encouraging agencies to do training. We're now asking agencies and getting a very good response that agencies are giving their employees substantive FOIA training. And we ourselves provide training to thousands of personnel every year. So training, I think we have handled. I think in the sense that we can do that now. And we're continuing to focus on that.
Ms. Barr.
Okay. Technology to help us quickly go through the various, we have information all over the world with different systems. That would be helpful. And of course, people. And at the same time, since we do have an Inspector General taking a look at our processes, we also hope to get something from that as well. But it's, it's a very serious problem, but for us it's also a complicated problem. Just trying to get all of the information in the right place quickly so that we can be responsive.
I want to thank all of you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you. I yield back.
Thank you. I thank you all to be here. I just want to make a comment on the IT part of the equation. One of the frustrations and is if you look at the amount of money that we pour into IT at the IRS, it's roughly $2 billion per year. $2 billion. Now you have 90,000 employees, right? It's unfair to just divide that number and calculate out some $20,000+ per person. But it's an extraordinary amount of money. And my guess is if we went to almost any corporation, private sector, and said, hey, we're going to give you a $2 billion a year over year, we're going to keep giving you billions of dollars for your IT, and then to have such a dilapidated system, I mean, we just don't understand that. It's not as if we're not pouring resources into IT budgets. You have billions of dollars at your disposal, and every time I turn around, I hear across agencies how bad it works. And we are, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but it's something like $75+ billion a year. Billion is spent on IT in the United States with our government, and it doesn't work. And then we get data breaches. I mean, we didn't even get into the data breaches that are happening at the IRS. So we have got to get a grip on what is important, what is working, what is not working. And if you think that there's a database out there that can't be searched because Microsoft wasn't smart enough to think about that, we got big problems. So I want to make sure that you and your staff know how much we do appreciate. It's a huge volume. It is supply and demand, and the demand has been greatly increasing. And that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of people. And I'm a huge believer that the overwhelming majority of our federal workers, they work hard, they work smart, they're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to do the right thing too. So while these hearings are sometimes tough and pointed and direct, and that's what they're supposed to do. That's the way. That's our Constitution in motion. We are supposed to be self-critical. That's what we do. That's how we get better. And we can't just put a smiley face on everything and say, "Oh, it's all good." We want to help solve those problems. We're not only the Oversight Committee, but we're also supposed to be government reform. And there will be a FOIA reform bill. We've passed one out of the committee. I wanted to take another breath and do several panels and get your perspective, the media, the outside groups, so that we get that thing just right. You don't get but once every couple decades a chance to reformulate something. So we're going to look back at that bill. We're going to see if we can't tighten up a couple other things, maybe lessen the number of exemptions. I think is something that we have got to be able to look at, and then probably speed up some of the other parts of the process so that it makes your job smoother and easier. And you got all these charts and graphs and, hey, what can we release and not? Let's do what President Obama said. Let's err on the side of release it. Release it. And I don't think your folks and your departments and your agencies have the freedom to do that. I think they are slowed down in what the New York Times called their representative, this culture that says, and it has happened over a long period of time, not just one administration, a culture that doesn't want to make a mistake and consequently doesn't want to release it, and consequently we aren't getting the American people what they paid for. We all work for them. You all work for them. And we got to be more responsive. They're telling us it's not working. And so we got to change something. We can't just keep doing the same thing. So I think it's been a productive 2 days of hearings. Still lots more to learn. We look forward to the interaction with you. I thank you for your time and your patriotism and your dedication to the country and your government. And we thank you. And this committee stands adjourned.